Hey, and welcome back to another video. This is the fourth episode of the story where there are so many things that we as humans are unaware of, or lack an understanding. The bijou are one of those things. Follow the journey of Naruto Uzumaki as he befriends the yokai that was sealed inside of him and, she, helps him grow stronger. Please support by liking and subscribing. Let's start the show. Erasure and Chujiro sped through the forest at a breakneck pace as they ran towards the town of Gokuwa. Even without knowing the directions to the small village, it would have been easy for them to find due to the smoke that was rising from its general direction. When the two burst through the tree line and into the town, both of them stopped cold. What had once seemed like a very peaceful settlement was now in ruins, fires were burning everywhere, buildings were gutted out or had collapsed completely, and bodies filled the street. What made the whole scene worse were that the bodies of the dead were not shinobi, no, they were civilians. Innocent women and children who had done no wrong, whose only crime, according to the Mizukage, was being born into a clan with a bloodline. Erasure could feel his entire body shaking as he stared at the terrible scene before him. How could someone do this? Arashi's voice came out as a harsh whisper. After everything he had been through in the past few years, he had thought things like death couldn't affect him. But the sight before him, a scene of women and children who had been cut down where they stood, made his blood boil like none other. What kind of monster is the Mizukage? Careful, Akane's voice came over their link. If you let your emotions slip, you may end up accidentally channeling some of my Yuki. You can't let people know that you hold me. Erasure heard Akane's words and closed his eyes, taking several deep breaths. His shaking stopped and he unclenched his fists, feeling liquid on his hands. The redhead looked down and saw that his nails had been cutting into his flesh. Sighing, he wiped his hands on his pants. The wound had already healed over. "Are you okay, Arashizan?" asked Chujiro. He was a little concerned when he saw the way the other man was looking. While he himself was angry and saddened by what he saw, his emotions were running nowhere near as high as the ones Erasure had. No, I'm not," Erasure sighed. How could anyone be okay when they see something like this? "But I'll give." A hardened look entered his eyes. "Come on, let's see if we can't find any survivors." The two walked through the town. Erasure made several dozen kage bunshin to bring out the bodies so they could be sealed into scrolls and returned to their loved ones for a proper burial. As he continued moving through the burnt-out buildings, occasionally checking the inside if it looked safe enough, he heard a sound that he had not heard in a while. It was the sound of crying. With his enhanced senses, Erasure was able to easily find the source of he crying, in one of the gutted-out buildings. It was a two-story house, and the crying was coming from the second story. Erasure walked into the house carefully. With how torn down it was, even the slightest mishap could cause the entire house to come down around his ears. After moving around the house, going through a door and into a hallway, he found the staircase leading up. Several times, Erasure had been forced to take a step back as he walked up the stairs. They weren't all that sturdy and a few of them had given out on him when he stepped on them. Because of how cautious he had to be, it took several minutes to get to the second floor. The crying was closer now, coming from the door to the first room on the right. He made careful, precise steps, letting the sound of the creaking floor wash over him in order to hopefully give him an advanced warning when the floor was about to collapse. When he got into the room with the crying, he was surprised to find the area was mostly intact. The wall to the left had crumbled. There was a hole in the far right side of the room, but other than that it looked much more whole than any of the other places he had seen. In the left-hand corner there was a small crib that Erasure walked up to. The source of the crying was inside. A small baby with dark brown fuzz on his head and brown eyes. Erasure gently lifted the little newborn into his arms and tried to soothe the thing by rocking it back and forth. "It's okay, little one," he whispered as the baby began to stop crying. "Nothing can hurt you now, you're safe." The baby must have spent the last several hours tiring itself out with his crying, because after a few minutes of Erasure having picked him up, he went to sleep. Not wanting to risk injuring the baby by going back down through the house, Erasure formed a clone and had it kicked out the window. He jumped down and channeled chakra to his feet, cushioning his fall. He stood back up from the crouch he had landed in and looked at the house he had found the baby in, then shook his head and began moving on, searching for more survivors. He made a Kage Bunshin and had it take the small baby, that way he could continue his search without having to worry. Go and find Chujiro, he told the clone quietly, stick with him as much as possible. The Kage Bunshin nodded and went off. Erasure went into one of the few houses that was still standing being a relative term. The house, like most others, was completely gutted, the back wall had been destroyed and rubble from the walls and furniture was strewn about all over the place. There wasn't much there, and so the red-haired swordsman moved to the back, and it was there he found something interesting. There was a very small amount of chakra in the air, it was small enough that only sensors would be likely to notice it. Erasure was thankful that Akane was sealed inside of him because she was far better than any sensor-type shinobi, and had noticed the chakra almost immediately. He placed his hands in the ram's seal and sent out a pulse of chakra in order to dispel what was most likely a genjutsu of some kind. A frown made its way onto his face, however, when nothing happened. He tried several more times, sending out larger and larger pulses of chakra. Each time he was met with failure. He wondered why the jutsu wasn't dispelling. Normally, when an area-wide genjutsu was used, it took a pulse of chakra larger than the one powering the jutsu to dispel. Erasure was easily using 3 times more than what he felt being used here, so it should have worked. Hang on a second, Akane said, speaking up as she began channeling her Yuki into Arashi's chakra coils. I'm directing my Yuki through, I want you to channel it to your eyes. Erasure raised an eyebrow in curiosity but shrugged it off, said, got it, and did as instructed. The world began to move into focus, his sight got sharper, everything became clearer, and he could see small particles of blue floating through the air. Is that chakra? He wondered in shock. Yes, Akane answered him, what you see are chakra particles that are being emitted in the air by whatever jutsu is being used here. Now, hurry up and find out how to dispel the jutsu. My Yuki hasn't fully integrated with you yet, so channeling this much to an organ as sensitive as your eyes will damage them if given enough time. Right, Erasure began looking around for something that may help him determine why he couldn't dispel the genjutsu. It was then he noticed something looked out of place under all the rubble. This house was made of brick, but there was some wood sticking out from under all of the refuse. Moving over, he began throwing the large chunks of brick away from his discovery, and soon found that the small piece of wood he had seen was actually a part of a large door that was set into the ground, obviously leading towards a basement level. And on the door was a fuinjutsu he had not seen before, but he could make out what it was and did thanks to his knowledge telling him that some of the seal matched one of his own genjutsu seals. This one was obviously to make this door appear invisible to others. It was a genius move, to be honest. A genjutsu was easy to dispel, so long as one could sense the foreign chakra in the area it could be broken. But a seal was near impossible to dispel unless one found the seal and broke it with their own fuinjutsu. It also explained why the genjutsu was still up. Part of the seal he saw was actually designed to draw in nature chakra and use it to power the rest of the seal. It wasn't the best work he had seen, but its application of seals was rather impressive. He quickly channeled chakra into his hand, unsealing a very beautifully crafted calligraphy brush with several seals running along the handle. He channeled chakra into the seals, creating a soft flow of ink as he began to draw along the seals, adding his own counterseal. When he was finished, he resealed his brush and channeled chakra into the seals he had created. There was a soft blue glow before the genjutsu seal began to hiss. The ink started to steam as it melted away, soon leaving nothing to show that it had ever been there. With nothing left but to open the door, Erasure did just that, grabbing both handles and heaving the doors open. The inside was pitch black, but thanks to his enhanced sight he could see a set of stairs. He cautiously made his way down the steps, keeping his footsteps as silent as possible. When he reached the end of the stairs he was met with a door. Trying to open it proved useless as he found it was locked. He could of course smash it open, but he didn't want to startle anyone on the other side. if there was anyone. So he raised a hand and gently rapped on the door with his knuckles. There was a soft gasp that his hearing managed to pick up on the other end. He heard a shuffling of feet, then a small slit in the door opened and a pair of green eyes peered out. "Who are you?" asked a female voice. She sounded young, maybe around her mid-teens, and petrified. "My name's Arisher." Trying to put the girl's mind at ease, he gave her a gentle smile. "I was sent here by May Terumi when we heard your town was under attack." "How can I trust you?" asked the girl. That was a good question. May hadn't given him any way to show his authenticity. He had no proof that he was who he said he was. "I suppose you can't," Arisher said slowly. "However, if I had been sent here to kill you, I would have just broken down the door." He paused for a moment to let that sink in. "Now why don't you come out of there?" The slit shut and there was a moment when nothing happened. Arisher wondered if he had scared the girl away. However, a minute or two later there was some more shuffling, then the sound of bolts being unlatched. A second later the door opened and Arisher saw a young girl, with odd silvery blonde hair was out of place on someone in kiri, green eyes and a dark blue yukata. She was currently holding a small boy of about 4 in her arms. "It's good to see more people alive here," Arisher said, smiling at her. "I've only found one other survivor and feared there was no one else." The girl looked at him with mistrust and more than a little fear. "Relax," he said, "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl stared at him for several more minutes before deciding that she really had no choice but to trust the man in front of her. She gave him a nod and stepped further outside. He gestured for her to follow him as he began to walk up the stairs. When they reached the top, the girl had to use one hand to cover her eyes as the sun showed through the mist. "How long have you two been down there?" asked Arisher, noticing her slight discomfort at the light. "Since the attack had started," the girl replied. "We were getting ready for dinner when we heard explosions outside." "Kazan, she. Realizing what the girl was trying to say, Arisher placed a hand on her back and rubbed it consolingly. "I'm sorry for your loss." He spent a moment giving the girl some time to get herself together before saying, "Come on, we should meet with my partner." Story of the 10-tailed wolf. "I see, so there were only a dozen survivors." May closed her eyes and gave a heavy sigh as she leaned back in her seat. It was times like these that she wished someone else could take up the mantle of leader for the bloodline faction. "Yais, Terumi-sama," replied Chujiro as he gave his report. He and Arisher had just gotten back to the base about 20 minutes ago, and after taking the survivors they found to the small hospital had made their way here. "We found 6 children between the ages of 1 and 8, 2 teenagers, and 4 adults, all women. Most of them had managed to hide themselves as the attack started." "Thank you, Chujiro, you may go," May said, not bothering to open her eyes. Chujiro nodded and left. He paused at the door and looked at Arisher, who he had expected to follow him. The red-haired swordsman gave his blue-haired companion a shake of his head before jerking it to May, indicating he still had something he wanted to talk to her about. Chujiro nodded before leaving. As the door shut, Arisher coughed, getting May to open her eyes and blink as she saw Arisher still standing there. "Is there something more you wish to discuss, Arashizan?" asked the auburn-haired beauty. "I was hoping to get a team together, and with your permission begin an investigation in order to root out whoever betrayed us to Yagura," said the man, not feeling like beating around the bush. "What?" asked May, her eyes widening slightly. "I want to begin rooting out the traitor among your ranks," Arisher repeated. "We can't launch any offensives until we know who the traitor is." Half of his reason for coming here was so he could gain experience in combat and war. But he wouldn't get any of that if they were unable to actually make any battle plans for fear that some traitor would overhear it and inform the Mizukage. May listened to the young man's words. She was a little shocked by his request but was also thinking about it carefully. She knew that they needed to root out the traitor as quickly as possible. The longer they sat there, the better chances Yagura had of defeating them. In truth, she had already planned on trying to root out the spy anyways, though she had been planning on getting Ao and maybe a few others to do the task. The problem was, May wasn't sure if she should just trust Arisher to root out the traitor. She knew he was not the spy like Hisagi had said. after their initial encounter Mei had done what she could do: dig up information on the name Erasure Kazama. There wasn't much, in fact, most people knew next to nothing about him. However, there was one man who worked in a weapons store that was decently acquainted: the red-haired swordsman. Apparently, Erasure had come to Konoha about a year and a half ago, looking for a place to sell his seals. Other than that, there wasn't much known about him, but Mei had only gotten the idea to request aid from Konoha a month before she left. There was simply no way someone could have predicted she would do that a year and a half in advance and send someone there to integrate themselves into her forces. No, she knew. Erasure was not the traitor, but she still was unsure whether he had any skills available for rooting out espionage. He was strong, there was no denying that. He may even be as strong as she was, but rooting out a spy was different than battling a horde of enemy ninja. It required much more subtlety. "And how do you plan on capturing this spy?" asked Mei. She wasn't going to write anything off yet. He may be able to help, and she couldn't afford not to use any resources she had at her disposal right now. "I need to gather information on all of the people who knew about your plan to ambush the quarterly caravan," began Erasure. "Chances are whoever betrayed you is a member of that group. When I find out who has the most to gain from such treachery, I'll want AO's help to keep an eye on my suspect." "So you can catch them in the act?" asked Mei. "So I can learn their habits," corrected Erasure. "Whoever just betrayed you isn't going to do anything to bring attention to themselves right now, they'll want to lay low. However, most people usually let some information slip in the way they act when not on duty. Once I find my suspect, I'll place a tracking seal on their person, and a voice recording seal in their room." "I see." Mei tapped her fingers on the desk in a random pattern as her eyes gained a thoughtful look. Eventually she looked at Erasure and in a calm voice said, "I can't let you do this." When the young man opened his mouth to protest, the auburn-haired leader held up a hand, silencing him. "Because you are an outside, I can't do this for fear of being seen as letting a foreigner do all the dirty work." However, she opened a drawer and reached in, pulling out several files which she set down on the desk. "Should you happen to come into some information on your own, and discover who this traitor is," the woman shrugged and smiled, "well, there's not much I can do about that." Erasure shook his head and let out a chuckle. "Clever, giving yourself plausible deniability in case my investigation goes south." He picked up the files and sealed them into a storage scroll. "Hisagai's not the only one with an isolationist view," Mei commented with a tired frown. "Unfortunately, most of Kiri prefers isolation. It's something I hope to change when I become Mizukage." The look vanished a moment later. "However, until then I have to play by these rules." "I understand," Erasure said as he straightened up. "Should you need me for anything, you'll know where to find me." Turning around, the young swordsman left for his room. Mei watched him walk out and sighed. "Don't betray the trust I'm giving you, Erasure." Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Erasure frowned as he continued reading through the files Mei had given him on the people who worked in Mei's inner circle, as it were. These were the people who she often consulted and spoke with when coming up with battle plans. Most of them were from once prominent bloodline clans, though many had been decimated by the many civil wars that had raged within Kirigakure. A few people, however, were not members of a clan and merely held their positions on merits alone. Ao was one such member. He was an experienced veteran, having been raised under the feared regime of the Bloody Mist and having fought in the Third Great Shinobi War. He had even fought some of Konoha's more powerful shinobi, such as Shursui Uchiha, known as Sunshin no Shursui, Shursui of the Body Flicker, due to his great mastery of the body Sunshin. It was because of the experience he gained from his past battles, and his ability to use the Byakugan, which he had taken after fighting a Hyuga at some point during his life, that he had been elevated to a high position of trust with Mei. Even if he did annoy her enough that she often threatened him with bodily harm. Chujiro was another who had been elevated to a high position. Because of his skill with Hiramakerii, a blade that had belonged to a member of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu, he had been appointed as Mei's personal bodyguard. Erasure did know much about either of them as people, beyond what he had seen during his interaction with them, but he was positive that neither of them would betray Mei. That meant it was one of the other 5 possible suspects. A tired yawn escaped his lips before he could cover it. Looking over at the clock he saw that it was an hour past midnight. "Why don't you get some rest?" suggested Akane. "You won't be able to find anything if you're tired like this." "Yeah. I guess you're right." Erasure rubbed his eyes and was just about to set the file he had been looking over on the desk, when his eyes widened in shock. This is Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Hisagi found himself gasping for breath as he continued running away from the rebel base. He had no idea how long he had been trying to escape from his pursuers but supposed it didn't matter. As the whistling sound of shuriken made their presence known, the man had to twist himself to dodge them. However, as he moved out of the way he caught a glimpse of one, and his eyes widened at the sight of an explosive note burning on it. The resulting explosion from the kunai destroyed the area Hisagi had been at, and only a quick Kariwimi had allowed him to get away. He growled as he saw his purser jump down from the trees and look at his hiding spot. "There's no sense in hiding, asshole," Erasure said as he glared at the man's hiding spot. "Why don't you come out and accept your death like a man?" The redhead's answer was several kunai being thrown at his head. However, before they could reach him, Erasure had pulled out his own kunai and blocked them. "I see, so that's your answer. Fine then." Erasure threw his own kunai and went through several hand seals, kunai kage bunshin no jutsu, kunai shadow clone jutsu. The one kunai sailing towards Hisagi soon turned into 30 kunai, forcing the lean man to jump out of the bush. "I've got you now!" Erasure shouted as he appeared next to Hisagi, who gasped as he was kicked in the solar plexus. Despite feeling the wind getting knocked out of him, the lean-built man managed to grab onto Arashi's leg and spin around, letting go and sending the redhead flying back. Not that it did much good. Erasure managed to right himself in midair before his feet hit the branch of a tree trunk behind him and he pushed off, using chakra to blast off faster than humanly possible. Hisagi pulled out a kunai and readied himself for battle as Erasure came at him, a kunai in his hand. Jumping out of the way, the scarred man was just able to evade his opponent's strike, and not wanting to give the swordsman a chance to recover began his own attack as soon as the man's feet touched the ground. "Hisagi Shuhei, I am here to apprehend you for the crime of betraying Mei Terumi," Erasure said even as the two continued to battle. He came in with a reverse horizontal slash that was blocked by Hisagi's kunai. The two tried to push against each other, letting sparks fly as steel clashed against steel. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Hisagi shouted as he managed to push the redhead back. He reached into a pouch he had strapped to his waist and pulled out several shuriken, tossing them at the Uzumaki swordsman who deflected them with ease. "Of course you don't," Erasure said sarcastically. He threw his kunai at Hisagi's head, using it as a distraction while he came in hard. Hisagi blocked the kunai only to receive a fist in the gut, causing him to gasp and spit out blood before he was sent hurtling to a tree. As he slid down the trunk, Hisagi held in a wince and placed a hand near his gut. Hearing footsteps coming towards him, he looked up to see Erasure looking at him with an impenetrable gaze. "You may think you've won, but if I go, I'm not going alone." Hisagi pulled open his vest and showed Erasure that he had several hundred exploding notes attached to his body. He grinned as he saw Arashi's eyes widen, right before the notes went off with a large explosion. The explosion rocked the ground for several meters, kicking up earth and destroyed trees as the intense heat from the fire burned away. Smoke billowed out from the epicenter of the blast, thick, black clouds that made it impossible to see anything inside the blast radius. When a stiff breeze blew away the smoke, all that was left was a large 20-foot crater and the only sign of Hisagi's passing. "Damn it," Erasure muttered as he dropped down from the ground and walked up to the crater. "Had I been any slower with my Kariwimi that would have killed me. You know, without my training you would have never been quick enough to escape that," Akane said with a small grin. "Aren't you glad I gave you my training now?" Erasure snorted. "Yeah, I'm so glad, because having some babe toss me around like a rag doll is how I get my jollies off." "Oh, does it really? Well, maybe when this war is over and you're back in Konoha Can get back to the grind, Akane said, her grin widening as she felt her container's fear. 2 was just kidding Akane-can, hee. Oh. So you don't like my training? Erasure could almost feel the pout on her face, and heard the slight danger in her tone. No, I love your training, it's just, well. Akane giggled as heard her container sputter, ah. You're so cute Narikan. I just want to eat you up when you get all embarrassed like that. It's Erasure, Erasure muttered, feeling his face heating up at Akane's words. No matter what happened she always managed to make him embarrassed. Right now, I'm Erasure, not Naruto. You'll always be Naruto to me, Naruto-kun, Akane said, her voice an odd mixture of teasing and caring. You'll always be my Naruto-kun. Erasure felt an odd heat well up inside of him at Akane's words. There was something about the way she said that seemed different than the way she usually talked to him. Erasure, turning his head, Erasure saw Ao and Chujiro jump next to him. I take it you got him? Ao asked as he eyed the crater. Yeah, Erasure said, looking at the last place he saw Hisagi with a frown. Bastard blew himself up. Then let's go and inform Terumi-sama, Ao grunted as he took to the trees again. Chujiro and Erasure quickly followed him as they made their way back to base. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Thanks to Arashizan and Ao's efforts we were able to discover that Hisagi was in fact the traitor who gave away the information about our ambush to Yagura, Mei said as she stared at the people gathered around her. Most seemed to be in a state of perpetual surprise, not that she could blame them. Thankfully, now that we have rooted out the traitor, we can begin making preparations to resume the war. Thanks to one of our informants within the ranks of Yagura's forces we have discovered that there will be a change in the guard at one of Yagura's fortress on the northernmost outlying island. This will prove to be the perfect opportunity to attack and capturing the base and gaining all of the stockpiles of weapons within it. Mei held up a map that showed the plans for the base she was giving her plans for. As you can see, the island is small enough that the base covers the entirety of it. Because of this, Yagura troops can only gain entrance to the base via a dock located on the inside. She drew everyone's attention to the design of a large steel door. This door is how the boats gain entrance to the inside. It has a pulley locking mechanism that requires a lot of manpower to move, due to the fact that they never upgraded the machinery on it. Our plan of action will be to attack the boat before it reaches the base and commandeer it. Once we gain entrance into the base it will be ours since no one will know that we are not with the Mizuki's forces. Mei looked around the table to see everyone looking at her with varying emotions. Are there any questions? I have one, asked a man. Appeared to be in his late 30s, perhaps early 40s. He had a few wrinkles on his forehead and under his gray eyes. The thing that stood out the most to Erasure was the scar that ran from his right cheek down to his neck. He had a faded light blue hair, which Erasure was beginning to note was a common color in Kiri. He was dressed in the standard Miss Jonan apparel that was slightly beat up and had definitely seen better days. Of course that was very standard with the war, most people had to make do with what they could find. Altogether, the man looked like your average shinobi. Yes, what is Koi? Asked Mei. Do you think this is the right time to strike? Asked Koi. I mean no offense, but we have just suffered from a serious defeat. 1/3 of our forces were lost in that last attack, either due to injury or death. I'm not sure if we have enough troops to launch an attack. Which is why this isn't a true attack, Mei replied confidently. The ship that will be carrying the shinobi replacements only has a total of 30 ninja in it. The island is quite small, and truthfully, not that important in the grand scheme of things. However, it will give us a closer reach to Kiri and some of the other fortresses. It's the first step towards reaching our goal of freeing Kiri from Yagura's tyrannical rule. Koi seemed to accept this as he nodded and Mei turned to the assembly of people. Our plan will commence in 3 days, in which I will choose the team I feel is best suited for the job. All of you are dismissed. One by one the ninja and advisors left, speaking in low, hushed tones. Erasure, with his enhanced senses, managed to pick up several of the conversations but paid it no mind. When everyone else was gone, Mei looked at the red-haired Uzumaki. I'm risking a lot with this plan. Are you sure it will work? I wouldn't have suggested it if I wasn't sure, Erasure said with a shrug. However, if it helps you feel better, AO is keeping an eye on things to make sure everything goes according to plan. May nodded and sighed as she leaned over the table. I really hope this works. My people can't afford to suffer any more losses than they already have. Erasure was silent for a moment as he saw the woman looking a lot more tired than he usually saw. It was obvious this war was taking its toll on her, even though she put up a strong front for her people. I'll do everything in my power to make sure this plan works, he said in a determined voice. Looking up at the man, May gave a tired but grateful smile. Somehow, I figured you'd say that. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Koi calmly walked towards his room, being sure to keep a calm and steady pace. It was difficult, what with the news he had just received when May had unveiled a new plan to try and get back for the defeat her forces had suffered. He had thought that she would not have wanted to take any serious action for a while now, but apparently, he had been wrong. The thought that she was going to launch another strike against Yagura made Koi excited. He walked into his room and closed the door, locking it shut and moving over to his desk. He fumbled around for a moment as he unlocked the door to one of his drawers, opened it, then opened the secret compartment within that drawer. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pen and began to write. May's forces will be attacking the fortress on the northern borders of Mizu no Kuni in 3 days, during the changing of the guard. The message was very basic, but it got its point across, Koi decided. He walked over to his window and pulled a small whistle from his pocket, blowing on it. No sound came from the whistle, at least none that he or any other human could hear. The whistle was not made for human ears. He only had to wait for a minute before a dark gray hawk flew onto the windowsill. Koi rolled up the letter and sealed an inside of ring that he then placed on the hawk's leg. You know what to do, he told the hawk, who, whether it understood him or not, flapped its wings and flew off. Deciding he would get some rest, Koi stripped down to his undergarments and laid down in bed. Soon, this would all be over. Soon, the bloodline rebels and Mei Terumi would die and the war would end. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. You're sure? Asked Mei as she listened to Ao give his report. Yes, Terumi-sama, Ao said. I was watching as Koi wrote the letter and read its contents. The hawk he used is a special night hawk that is used only by the Kiri Hunter Ninja Squad when sending either the head of a missing nin, or special information so they can receive more directives. Seems Erasure was right after all. Mei laced her hands together as she placed her elbows on the desk. Wouldn't you say, Hisagi? From behind her, a wall opened up, one of the many hidden passages that was hidden throughout the base in case it ever fell under attack. From within the secret passage Hisagi Shuhei stepped out. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Several miles south of a small town in Mizu no Kuni stood one of the Mizukige's many fortresses. Unlike most hidden villages, where there was only one village and no real outposts or bases, Kirigakure was different in that it held several large strongholds due to the near-constant civil wars they had been in. Likewise, due to Mizu no Kuni being made up of many small islands, the Mizu daimyo did not have as large a samurai force as other nations like Hai no Kuni or Kaminari no Kuni, Land of Lightning. This was just another reason why the Mizukige had gone unopposed for as long as he had. This fortress in particular was the stronghold for one of the Mizukige's most feared generals, and one of the last living members of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu that was still loyal to his village. The man known as Kushimari Kuriere. The fortress itself was large and imposing, a 3-story hexagonal building with a large stone wall that had barbed wire on the top and only one entrance. Situated along the wall were 6 guard towers that held 2 ninja, whose job it was to search the surrounding area with large searchlights in case of attack. The entire area around the fortress for 50 meters in all directions was free of any vegetation that could be used to hide. In short, unless you had a large army that was capable of destroying the walls and/or gate, breaking inside was impossible. Which of course was why they were sneaking in and not breaking in. Alright, you all know the plan, Ao said gruffly as he began to speak to his troops and Erasure. The signal should come soon from our guy on the inside. when we get it, we're to head over to the guard tower on the left of the gate to get in and hook up with our spy. Afterwards, we are to take out all of the guards, quietly. Meanwhile, Erasure will be going in to deal with Kushimaru himself. Every turned to the red head at those words and he just nodded solemnly. Now, we wait. The shinobi in the squad broke up a little as they did whatever it was they did when waiting for the action to start. Some spoke to each other, cracking jokes and telling tall tales in order to relieve the tension they felt at the possibility of this mission going sour. Others were sharpening their kunai, checking their supplies, and a few, he noticed, were silently praying. As for Erasure himself, he was getting support from the one person who mattered most. "You're worried," noted Akane as her container sat in a meditative position with his eyes closed and his breathing slow and even. "Of course I am," Erasure said, his voice sounding similar to a soft breeze within the seal. "This will be the first time I go up against a ninja whose talent may equal or even surpass my own abilities, an A-rank ninja, a true elite of the village. All of the other opponents I faced were standard B-rank jonin, an A rank is several levels above that. I can't help but be worried." "You'll do fine," Akane reassured her container and closest friend. "You have easily surpassed all my expectations during training and have gone beyond the level most normal ninja can reach. I have absolute faith in your abilities. However, should you need my assistance, you know all you have to do is call." "Thanks Akane-kan," Erasure said to the person he cared more about than anyone else in the entire world. The woman, who Erasure often found too beautiful for mere words to describe, had always been the one to support him in recent years. She had done more for him than anyone else, training him to be strong, teaching him what he should have been taught at the orphanage, telling him about his heritage and helping him cope with all the hardships in his life. It was only because of her that he was the person he was today, and he would always be grateful to her. "Oh my, stop it Naruto-kun, you're making me blush. You heard all that?" Naruto's voice squeaked across the mindscape. Akane grinned, "Seems you still have trouble keeping yourself from transmitting your thoughts." She could almost feel his blush. "You know, it's quite flattering to know you think of me like that. Perhaps, sometime in the future you can come down into the seal and show me just how grateful you are." "Akane." Erasure stuttered at the provoking thoughts and images her words invoked. He could hear Akane's tinkling laughter in his mind and was about to try and get back at her when a voice interrupted him. "You okay, kid?" asked Ao, who was looking at Arashi's red face in concern. "You're not looking so well, your face is all red." "I'm fine," Erasure said as he tried to get his blush under control. "I just have a sunburn is all." Ao blinked, "But there's no sun out. It's from yesterday." "Yesterday was misty," Ao pointed out, confused about why the kid was coming up with such lame excuses as to why his face was red. Arashi's right eye began to twitch violently as he glared at the blue-haired hunter ninja. "Ao, shut up, or I'll kill you." "Oh great, now he's copying Terumi-sama," Ao thought with a sweat drop. Story of the 10-tailed wolf getting into the fortress had been easy enough. Once the signal had been given, the light in the left guard tower moving skyward, the team of ninja had made their move. The race across the grounds between where they had been on standby, and the gate had been easy enough, if a little nerve-wracking due to the fact that had this been a trap they would have all died. Thankfully there had been no mishaps and Erasure, Ao, and the others had made it to the top of the guard tower, where they hooked up with Mei's informant. From there the teams had split up into groups of two. Ao and Akunoichi's, whose name Erasure never bothered to learn, went off, while the two shinobi besides Ao in the squad had gone another way. That left Erasure with the informant, who was traveling with him after he had made some Kage Bunshin to replace the guards the man had killed. "Kushimaru will be on the top floor in his office," the man told Erasure quietly as they snuck into the main fortress. The redhead was thankful that they had not deemed it necessary to post guards at the door, believing that they were safe enough with the guard towers and large wall. "I would go with you, but I need to get back to my post or they may realize something is wrong." Erasure nodded, "Good luck." Same to you. Sticking to the ceiling and having Akane place a powerful invisibility illusion on him, Erasure made his way towards the end of the hall, made a right, another right, and one left before he reached the staircase. He dropped to the floor, using chakra to make his fall silent, and proceeded to walk up the stairs. When he got to the third floor there was only one door, and knew it led to his adversary. Taking a deep breath he opened the door and walked in. I've been waiting for you to show up. Erasure looked at the man who was hailed as one of Kiri's strongest swordsmen. Kushimaru was both very thin and tall in stature, giving him an overall gangling appearance. He had long, shaggy white hair, and due to his service within the ANBU, his face is concealed by a white porcelain mask, with a darker colored triangle on its lower part, slits for eye holes and Kirigakure's symbol carved on its top. His attire consisted of a sleeveless black shirt, matching pants, complete with a waistguard, and Kirigakure's striped wrist and leg guards. He also wore bandages around his neck and possibly around the lower half of his face. Attached to his back was a sword. The nuabari, a blade itself, was that of a narrow, long sword, choto, that greatly resembles a large needle, with a long length of thin wire mirroring thread, tied to the eye located at the base of its hilt. Erasure had heard many stories of that blade and knew not to underestimate it or the man's mastery in its use. You were expecting my presence? Asked Erasure, as he summoned his blade to his hand. Of course. How did you know I was even here? I sensed your presence the moment you and the others made it into my fortress, the man answered in an unconcerned manner. You're a censor then, Erasure said. Yes. If you knew we were coming, then why did I let you in without alerting the outpost? Finished Kushimaru, turning around to face Erasure. I have been waiting for a challenge since I took up my position within the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu. Ever since I came to this position I have not been able to find a true challenge. Erasure couldn't really see the man's face, but he had a feeling Kushimaru's eyes were on his blade. His next words confirmed it. You are an Uzumaki, one of the last, I suspect. The Uzumaki clan was a clan that was once feared for their kenjutsu, and their powerful Kekkei Genkei. Reaching a hand behind him, the white-haired swordsman grabbed nuabari and unsheathed it. I have heard much about you since you came to Kiri, and since then I have wanted to test myself against you. Well, don't I just feel special now, Erasure said as he slid into the beginning stance for the Issei no Ryuken sword style. The redhead smirked. Looks like we're facing each other for the same reason. I've always wanted to test myself against one of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu. Kushimaru got into his own stance, one that Erasure had never seen before, even in the scrolls in his house, so it seems. The two stared at each other, a silence that was merely the calm before the storm. As if on an unspoken signal they rushed each other, their blades sending sparks as they hit the others, and the two began their dance of death. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Several miles outside of the main base for the Bloodline faction, Koi Sento was running for his life. His jonin vest and the shirt underneath were in ruins, torn to shreds by kunai and shuriken that had only just missed him. His skin had several lacerations from the ones that didn't. His breathing was erratic, the kind of breathing one had when they had been running for as long as he had. Yet he knew he had to keep going, he had to keep running or he would be killed. He still had no clue how it had happened, but somehow he had been found out. Koi had thought that all of the searching was finished when that Erasure guy had killed Hisagi, mistakenly thinking that he was the traitor. Yet now it was clear that he had been played a fool. They had known he was the traitor somehow, or had found out some time after. Either way it didn't matter, all that did was losing his tail and leaving. Before he could get much further however, he felt the sharp pain of a kunai digging into his calf. He stumbled, his exhaustion, mixed in with the pain causing him to slow. It was all the time his purser needed to catch up to him. You're finished Koi, give up, Hisagi said as he stalked towards the tired man. However, Koi didn't seem to be finished as he attempted to go through several hand signs for a jutsu. However, Hisagi was in no mood to let this man finish, rushing him and slamming a fist in the older man's gut. As Koi leaned forward and wheezed from the loss of breath, the lean-built man smashed an elbow into his face. Koi fell to the ground, unable to hold himself any longer. He had exhausted his chakra, his body had given out and he could hardly feel some of his muscles and only felt pain in others. He hadn't been in his prime for years, a lack of actually going on missions and not training himself anymore had caused his physical prowess to degrade. Now he almost felt like a civilian. How is it you're still alive?" asked Koi as Hisagi stood over him. Hisagi stared at the man as he remembered the events that had transpired to this moment. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf flashback. "You're sure of this?" asked Mei, her voice a mixture of disbelief and shock. "I'm 100% positive," Erashur said as he handed her some files. "Koi Sento is the traitor. Out of all the people he not only has the most say in most of your plans, but is also privy to more information than anyone else. I found those files in his room. It seems he has been giving reports to the Mizukage and receiving orders on what to do, and has been ever since he joined you." "I can't believe he would do this," Mei whispered. For once in her life she was well and truly shocked. "What does he gain from this?" The purging of all bloodlines within Kiri, Barashi's comment caused Mei's head to snap up and look at him. It seems his family was killed at the beginning of the Civil War, during the Kagaya's attack on Kirigakure. Ever since then, he's hated people with Kekei Genkei. "I see." Mei closed her eyes and sighed. She honestly couldn't blame the man for his hatred of bloodlines. Losing one's family is horrible. "I take it you have a plan to deal with him?" "Of course," Erashur said. "Then do so." Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf at hearing the knock. On the door, Hisagi walked over to it and opened it up. "What do you want?" he asked with a sneer as he saw who it was. Erashur, however, didn't seem all that bothered as he grinned at the older man. "How would you like to help me catch a traitor?" he asked, causing Hisagi to blink. Flashback end. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. "I see," Koi said, closing his eyes. He knew he wouldn't be getting away from this alive. "Perhaps I'll finally be able to see my wife and daughter again." "This is the end, Koi," Hisagi said as he pulled out a sword and swung it down, cutting the man's head clean off. Sighing, he sealed the head inside a containment scroll, then burned the body with a Katon Jutsu. He looked at the sky for a moment before heading off to report his success at killing the traitor to Mei. Erashur and Kushimaru put on a burst of speed as they rushed each other, locking their blades together as they swung at one another. Each pushed against the other, trying to gain the advantage and determine the other ninja's strength. That ended when they both jumped back. Both opponents moved around in a circle as they eyed the other. It was Erashur who broke first. Quicker than a flash, the red head was right in front of Kushimaru, swinging his sword vertically in a way that would bisect the Kiri swordsman from his left collarbone to his right hip. If it ever hit. Kushimaru brought his sword up, blocking the strike and bringing their locked blades around before reversing his blade's edge so that it was facing Erashur. He swung his sword in a swipe that would have cleaved the red-haired Uzumaki in half. However, Erashur jumped back in time, only to be forced to dodge several speeding thrusts that would have poked a hole right through him. It was harder for him to dodge the man's attacks due to how fast they were. Kushimaru's speed when stabbing at someone was said to be unparalleled due to the unique nature of his sword. Erashur could agree with them. The man's arm and blade were nothing more than a blur as he attempted to impale the red head. However, Erashur had his own tricks up his sleeve and after a few seconds of dodging was able to find how Kushimaru timed his attacks. During the man's next attempt to kill him via impalement, Erashur brought his sword up to deflect the blow. He pushed both of their swords wide and came in with an elbow, hoping to hit his opponent in the face. It was dodged as Kushimaru moved back, jumping a few feet away. The man then threw his sword at Erashur, who merely deflected it, sending it off course and forcing Kushimaru to run and catch it. Not wanting to give the man time to recover, the Uzumaki swordsman blurred out of focus, reappearing next to Kushimaru just as he grabbed his blade. "I'm not really sure what you hope to accomplish by doing that," Erashur said as the Kiri swordsman brought his blade up to block. "Honestly, throwing a sword in combat? That might work against an opponent who isn't a very good swordsman. But that sort-of crap won't work against an Uzumaki. So it seems, Kushimaru said, sounding completely unconcerned before he pushed against Arashi's blade and jumped to the side. He swung his own sword, bringing it across his body, but the attack was blocked. I guess I'll need to take this up a notch. Erasure narrowed his eyes before they widened slightly. Kushimaru suddenly became a blur of motion as he attempted to impale the blonde on his blade. It was only thanks to the intense training that Akane had made him go through that kept Erasure one step ahead of the man's sword. He continued to dodge and redirect the direction of the Kiri swordsman's blade, before jumping back to gain some breathing room. So this is the Uzumaki Kenjutsu style Issei no Ryuken, Kushimaru commented as they both agreed to a small break in order to feel out their opponent. I must say it's impressive though a tad basic. You think so, huh? Erasure said, a smirk beginning to grace his features. I suppose someone who's never faced an Uzumaki would think that. Why don't I show you the true form of Uzumaki Kenjutsu? The redhead shifted his stance, feet spread shoulder-length apart at a 45-degree angle, knees bent ever so slightly, while his arms went above his head, bringing his sword down on the other side of his body so that the blade was facing down. The stance was far different than your standard Kenjutsu stance, and Kushimaru wondered what it could do. Just then Erasure kicked off, blurring towards him in a burst of speed. As the redhead came closer he swung his blade horizontally from the left. The attack was actually slower than his last ones, and Kushimaru managed to block the strike but soon realized what a mistake doing so was. The moment his sword made contact with Arashi's, he was sent skidding back several feet from the mere force of the swing. His blade quivered from the power behind the redhead's blow, and he could even feel his arms shaking slightly. He poured chakra into his arms and blade in an effort to stop their shaking. That's impressive, Kushimaru commented lightly. Your change in stance has affected the amount of power you can put behind your strikes. By bringing your sword up like that you are able to bring more force into your attacks at the cost of your speed. Correct, Erasure said as he moved back into his stance. As you said, the Uzumaki Kenjutsu style is fairly basic. Unlike most styles we don't have any unique dances. However, we do have forms, sword stances that allow us to utilize a specific physical and mental ability, speed, strength, dexterity, agility, cunning, constitution, protection, deflection. These are the 8 forms of the Uzumaki Kenjutsu style, designed to bring out the full potential towards a specific human ability. This is Form 3, the strong style. Fascinating, the man said, though from the way his voice was monotone it was hard to tell if he was truly fascinated. So this is the true Uzumaki style. Tell me, how many forms do you know? Erasure chuckled, now that would be telling. He rushed in again, aiming a downward swing at Kushimaru's head. Knowing what would happen should he block from his last encounter with the redhead, the Kiri swordsman dodged the attack, rather than attempting to block it. That proved to be a wise choice, since when the blade passed through where he had been it struck the ground and tore up chunks of it, leaving a nice, long gash in the floor. The battlefield had changed as Kushimaru was placed on the defensive, trying to find a way past Arashi's guard or some kind of weakness he could exploit. Meanwhile, Erasure himself was on the complete offensive. The form he was using, Form 3, was a style that neglected defense and speed for power, and as such forced him to keep as much on the offense as possible. On and on this continued as the two moved across the room. It became a game of cat and mouse, where Kushimaru would dodge and Erasure would attack. The room itself soon became a bit of a mess. Gouges ran along the walls and floors from when Arashi's attacks missed. The gouges were a testament to the power behind the redhead's blows. The stalemate soon ended when Erasure came in for his next swing. Kushimaru timed his movements with Erasure, ducking under the man's swing and then stabbing at him. The red-haired Uzumaki did his best to dodge and managed to avoid serious injury, but he did not get away unscathed. A hiss escaped his lips as he held a hand to his lower left torso. Blood dripped between his fingers from the slight cut he had gotten. You are good, Erasure commented, not many people could have found that weakness so soon. Comes with being a member of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu, Kushimaru said. Right, in that case. Once again Erasure shifted styles, his feet were spread wider and he placed his blade in front of him, the grip held up near his left shoulder, with the tip point diagonally down from near his right hip. Let's see how you handle this. Kushimaru's instinct screamed at him to move and, not one to ignore such a powerful compulsion, he rolled forward across the floor. As he did, the singing of a blade passing through where he had been previously sounded, so close to him that several strands of hair were cut off. Pushing his hands on the ground he kipped up to his feet. Only to come face-to-face with Erasure, his blade already swinging again. Kushimaru moved his own blade to block it, but the moment their blades touched, the red head had once again disappeared. The Kiri swordsman spun around out of instinct and managed to block a strike meant for his head, but Erasure yet again disappeared and this time he was unable to fully dodge the strike sent his way. Now I see why the Uzumaki clan is so feared, Kushimaru commented as he held a hand to where he had been cut, the same place as the one he gave Erasure, only on the opposite side. This new stance lets you utilize intense speeds that most would have trouble just seeing, much less reacting to it. You Kiri swordsmen really are something, Erasure said, to be able to figure out my style so easily. You're a credit to your name. Thank you, Kushimaru went through several hand seals, but now that I have seen more of your abilities I can't let this continue. You are too dangerous to be left alive. Now you will see the way a true member of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu fights, Kirigakure no Jutsu, Hidden Mist Jutsu. That's right, I had heard that Kushimaru was a master of the Muon Satsujin Jutsu, Erasure thought to himself as he stared into the thickening mist. It's a very quiet method of killing an opponent, usually from behind with a blade. Additionally, because the user is very silent, it cannot be defended against. The user will often slit their opponent's throat, preventing any cry that might give them away. Well, since my eyesight is useless, I might as well not use it. Erasure closed his eyes. He switched stances once again, moving his blade so that the hilt was next to his lower abdominal muscles and the blade was pointing away from him. He extended chakra into his ears and nose, hoping to pick out the sound and scent of his opponent before the other Kenjutsu user could attack. Acting with surprising speed, Erasure brought up his blade and blocked an attack that would have slit his throat. He pushed the blade away, then spun around with a slash meant to slice his opponent in half. He hit nothing but air however, and moved back into his stance. Another attack came, this one a piercing attack designed to impale him. Erasure twisted his body away and around as he used his blade to redirect the attack, at the same time he lashed out with a kick. Once again he hit nothing but air. The battle continued along this vein as the two attempted to outmove each other. Kushimaru's attacks would come from all angles, completely silently. Despite this, Erasure was more than able to hold his own and continued blocking all of the attacks that came at him. He attempted his own counterattacks, striking immediately after the Kiri swordsman's attack failed. However, this always seemed to end in failure as Kushimaru was simply too fast for a reactionary attack to work. Your ability to fight despite being blinded is impressive, Kushimaru said, his voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. How are you able to know when I'm attacking? Erasure snorted, tell you what, you teach me how to use the Muon Satsujin Jutsu and I'll tell you how I can still figure out where you are. Deal. His answer was several fast attacks that came from his left, right, and then behind. Erasure moved his blade in a blur as he dodged the right, used his blade to redirect the attack so it just missed him, twisted his body to left, allowing the blade to pass him by, then spun a full 180 degrees, bringing his blade up at the same time to knock away the blade that came at him from behind and was set to impale him. He took several deep breaths as he tried to regain control of his breathing. That was harder than I thought. I'm lucky Akane never pulled her punches in our spars or I never would have been able to keep up with this guy. You're so sweet Naruto-kun, Akane's voice suddenly popped up in his mind. Well, I'm always here if you want to come into the seal and thank me properly. Erasure blushed even as he dodged 3 more strikes that had been set to kill him. not now Akane. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Ao covered the mouth of his last victim. The shinobi's eyes snapped open, but before the man could do anything, Ao slit his throat. The blue-haired hunter ninja watched as the shinobi's eyes glazed over and dimmed. Looking around with his Byakugan, he made sure that was the last ninja in this room. Seeing that it was, he made his way outside, where he was met with his partner for this mission, covered in blood, though from the way she was standing he knew it was not her own. Had some problems? Asked Ao. The kunoichi sighed but nodded her head. One of the shinobi woke up before I could kill him. I had to cut a different artery to finish him off faster, before he could sound the alarm. That happens from time to time, Ao said. Our task is done now, we should meet up with the others outside. Hopefully we can inform Terumi-sama of our accomplishment and have her send some troops to bring this place under our control. The kunoichi nodded and the two of them began to move. Do you think that Erasure guy is alright? She asked after a few moments. He's fine, Ao grunted. I saw the kid fight before when he managed to hold off nearly 300 shinobi by himself. It will take more than one ninja, even one as famous as Kushimaru Kuriere, to kill him. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Erasure continued blocking all of the strikes that were sent his way by the opposing swordsmen. A good thing too, as all of the attacks launched at him so far would have killed him. However, he was quickly getting frustrated by the ongoing battle. So far neither he nor Kushimaru had landed a single hit on each other since the Kiri swordsman had made the mist. Kushimaru was simply too fast for Erasure to hit using reactionary attacks, and Erasure could figure out where Kushimaru was going to attack seconds before he did it. This left them at a stalemate. Damn it, with the way this is going I'm going to have to use one of my Uzumaki techniques to beat him, thought Erasure as he dodged a strike to his left, blocked another from his right and managed to sidestep the last one from above him. He always comes in with 3 strikes before he backs off. He knows that if he stays in one place for too long I'm likely to hit him, so he has to keep on the move. That meant he had to come up with a way to attack the man before he could get in his 3rd strike. There was a move that would allow this, but he had yet to complete it. When he had been training. Well, no time like the present I guess, he thought to himself as he shifted his stance again. Erasure extended his senses out as far as they could go in an effort to be ready for the man to strike. The attack came from behind him, a thrust to his lower back, right near his spinal column. The red head twisted his body and brought his sword up in a vertical guard, deflecting the attack. The Nuabari moved back and the attack was now coming from his left, at shoulder height. Bringing his sword down, Erasure blocked the strike and pushed the blade away. The last strike Erasure could feel was coming from behind him, and it was here that he struck. The edge of his blade began to glow a bright white that almost seemed to pierce the mist. When the attack came, a piercing motion aimed at his neck, Erasure struck. He swung his sword up, blocking the attack and knocking it away, then he reversed the direction of the blade and brought it down in a swift motion. Uzumaki Hijitsu, Haitan, Shashiki Ranpu, Uzumaki Hidden Technique, Light Release, Cutting Light. A crescent beam the same width and length of his blade shot out of the edge and soared into the mist. There was a grunt and Arashi's enhanced hearing could pick up the sound of blood splashing on the ground. A second later there was a thump, a sound recognizable as a body hitting the floor. The mist began to clear and Erasure, allowing the red-haired Uzumaki to open his eyes and look around the room. Less than 2 feet away he saw Kushimaru, laying on his back with his sword at his side. There was a long gash in his clothes, a cut that ran the entire length of his torso and covered some of his neck. Blood was beginning to leak into his clothes, a growing stain of red that was soon pooling around his body. His breaths heaved in ragged, gurgled gasps, letting Erasure know that his attack had likely cut up a lung. That was the best fight I ever had, Kushimaru spoke out, blood beginning to leak out from under the mask. His face turned to look at Erasure, who had walked up to his side. You are strong, I'm glad we fought. As am I, Erasure said, you were my toughest opponent yet. As a reward for defeating me, I'll tell you something interesting about the Mizukage. Kushimaru's breathing was getting heavier and more labored as he spoke. He rarely ever leaves his compound anymore. Most of our soldiers think he's gone mad. And what do you think? I don't think he's really himself anymore. The dying man said, he has isolated himself, more and more. Beware, the man with the mask, he is. Whatever he was about to say was cut off as the man took one last labored breath and died. Erasure stood there for a minute, digesting what he had just heard before he pulled out a scroll. He sealed up both the body and the sword and placed the scroll back in his pouch. With his mission accomplished, he decided it was time he went to find Ao's team and hook back up with them. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Back within Konoha, Chishio Naruto had just gotten out of the first half of class and was now on his lunch break. It had been nearly 6 months since Naruto had left to fight in the civil war in Kiri, using his persona of Erasure Kazama, the Uzumaki sealing expert who had forsaken his clan name. During that time things in Konoha had gone on as usual. Sasuke was still being a prick. Naruto had at least tried to befriend the disillusioned Uchiha, but the kid was even more obstinate and arrogant than ever. Not only that, but he seemed to have a darkness inside of him. The raven-haired academy student had completely isolated himself from everyone else. His fangirls were just as bad as they always were. Naruto didn't quite understand what it was girls found attractive about broody, emo, Bishonen boys like Sasuke, but they seemed to have this belief that one of them would be the girl to heal their Sasukekin's broken heart or some crap like that. They probably didn't even realize that Sasuke most likely wished they were all dead so they wouldn't be around to annoy him. Everyone had stayed the same as always. Shikamaru was a lazy ass, Choji still ate every second of every day, Kiba was still a loud-mouthed braggart and was also starting to become something of a lecher, Hinata was still a shy, underconfident girl, though Naruto noticed that she had tried stalking him on occasion before he gave her the slip, and Ino and Sakura were still the most obnoxious of Sasuke's fangirls. Naruto resisted a sigh. Sometimes it was hard pretending to be an extremely happy idiot, and hiding all of his skills from everyone. A part of him, most of him, just wanted to bust out, show up the Uchiha and kick ass. He knew it was slightly childish of him, and he knew that he couldn't afford to bring suspicion to himself. The civilian populace still hated him, but right now they just thought he was harmless and so no one attacked him anymore. All that would change if they learned just how powerful he was. As he was walking to his usual place to eat, he felt something crawl along his shoulder. Reaching up, Naruto grabbed whatever it was between his thumb and forefinger. He brought it up to his eyes and saw that it was a bug. It was a small beetle-like insect. Naruto recognized it as the Aburame clan's Kikaichu beetles. Looking around, Naruto found Shino standing under a tree. It was hard to tell what he was looking at thanks to the sunglasses, but he had a hand raised up to his face, so he must be looking at some kind of bug. Walking over, he got the attention of the quiet bug user and held up his hand with the Kikaichu on it. "Is this yours?" "Yes, it is," Shino said in a monotone voice. Naruto held out his hand. The beetle crawled onto the quiet Aburame's waiting hand. "I would suggest that you ask for my permission the next time you want to let your beetles feed on my chakra," Naruto said with a grin. Shino raised his eyebrows, the only sign that showed he was surprised, though it was hard to see with his hood up. "I'll remember that," he said. Naruto grinned, "Then we'll have no problems." Lunch soon came to an end and the blonde walked away and headed back into class. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Everyone, it is time to strike at the heart of our problems and end this war. Mei was speaking to her soldiers from a raised platform. Beside her stood Ao, Chujiro, Hisagi and Erasure, who had become a symbol of strength to her people. This war has gone on for several years, and we have faced many hardships and shed more blood than any people should ever have to. However, the end of our troubles is near. In 6 days' time, we will be launching an all-out assault on Kirigakure's walls. The proclamation was met with stunned silence. For the past several months, the Bloodline forces had been having a lot more success in battle than the Mizuki's forces. Since Kushimaru's defeat at Arashi's hands, the tides of war had changed. In the past month alone, their forces had assaulted and taken over 4 different fortresses. Each one had been given up without much of a challenge. In fact, most of their takeovers had been brought about in part because of the many people Mei now had on the inside. Thanks to Yagura's continued involvement in terrorizing his own people with bandits, many of the Mizuki's ninja had grown to dislike the man. Several ninja had even grown to hate him, after their own families were killed or taken slave by the many thugs that infested Mizu no Kuni. People wanted change, and were sick of the war. Because of this many of the Mizuki's shinobi had turned traitor, believing that they would be better off living with the Kekkei Genkei clans than a man who would not only allow his own people to be killed, but also have his forces take part in it. Still, the proclamation that they were assaulting Yagura in a heathen attack was shocking. Just a few months ago they had suffered a major defeat and now they were going to fight Yagura and his forces head-on. However, no one said anything, everyone wanted this war to end, and even if they were afraid of losing, they would still fight. All in the hopes that one way or another, this would end. Thanks to Yagura's foolish actions we now have many ninja inside his camp who will be fighting alongside us, Mei continued. Many who are dissatisfied with the rule of a man who has become disillusioned and lost sight of his goals in an attempt to prolong this war. I won't lie to you, there is a chance that many of us will die, however, I know that in the end we will win. A cheer went up with the crowd. Unlike normal people, these were shinobi, death was part of the business and didn't bother them. I want all of you to be ready, check your equipment and speak with your families. In a few days you'll receive your orders and in 6, we march on Kiri. The shinobi cheered again and Mei let it continue before ordering her troops to get a good night's sleep and spend as much time with their families as possible. When everyone had cleared out, Mei turned to the 4 behind her. I'll be counting you 4 for support. Don't worry, I don't know about stick up his ass here, but you can count on me, Erasure said with a cocky grin as he hitched a thumb towards Hisagi who gained an eye twitch. You damn punk. You think you can just go around insulting me? Hisagi glared at him. Keep up with that lip and I'll have to teach you a lesson. Like you could, old man, said Erasure, ignoring the fact that Hisagi was only 22 years old. You can try if you liked, but just know that you'll be eating those words after I shove my foot off in your ass. Why could you two please stop fighting, asked Mei, I thought you had gotten over your differences. Nah, he just learned to be more open-minded, said Erasure, that doesn't make him any less of a prick. Hisagi growled again but the redhead just ignored him. Anyways, I'm heading out. Gotta get some fresh air before I vomit from the smell of ass this guy's exuding. As Erasure left, Hayagi began a loud rant about red-headed idiots and how he was going to beat the crap out of that red-headed punk. Everyone else ignored him. You know, sometimes that kid seems to have a childish streak, Eo said as he shook his head. And I thought he was a real man. A real man, thought Mei as a tick mark appeared on her forehead. You know, the kind of man you can count on in times of need, not a child. A real man, need a child. Back in my day, Ao. Mei interrupted in a sickly sweet voice that screamed danger, shut up, or I'll kill you. Ao gaped at Mei as she walked off. What did I do? Story of the 10-tailed wolf. Erasure stood on a bluff with Mei, Ao, Chojuro and Hisagi as he looked out at the village of Kirigakure no Sato. Kirigakure's architecture is composed of several cylindrical buildings, with the Mizuki's palace being the widest and the largest. Like its name, the village is surrounded by a thick mist, with several mountains in the background, making it difficult to find by foreigners. Behind them was nearly the entirety of the bloodline forces. They had emptied out many of the bases and left only a skeleton crew at the main fort, along with a few shinobi at some of the villages to protect them in case of attack. Mei had the men left use Mizuki bunchins to keep up the illusion that all of their bases were full, in order to make sure Yagura suspected nothing. The illusion seemed to work, for the village they were looking at was as quiet as ever. When our forces inside begin their assault, I want Ao and Hisagi to lead our forces, Mei began, reiterating their plan as a last-minute check-up. Chijiro, it will be your job to take on the last member of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu, Jinin Akabino. Meanwhile, Erasure and I will take on Yagura. That had been the plan that they had come up with during the last 6 days. The many dissatisfied ninja in Yagura's camp would plant several explosives inside the main buildings in Kiri, blowing them sky high and sending the signal for Mei's forces to begin their attack. Hisagi and Ao would then lead their ninja and meet up with the turncoat forces inside and begin their takeover. The only difficulty they might have would be securing the village with minimal damage to its infrastructure, but hopefully they would be able to accomplish that. At the very least, they wouldn't have to worry about any civilian casualties thanks to the ninja inside taking care to ensure all civilians remained indoors at night and would have several forces guarding the area with the most heavy population. Chujiro's job would be to deal with one of the few remaining people who could pose a threat. Jinin Akabino, the last loyal member of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu. It would be his hardest challenge yet. However, it was Mei and Erasure who would have the most difficult battle ahead of them. It was their job to kill Yagura, the Yondaime Mizukage and Jinchuriki for the Sanbai no Kayadegame, three-tailed giant turtle. Not much was known about the man's abilities except that he was presumed to be a very powerful shinobi due to him being chosen as the Mizukage, and was also one of the few Jinchuriki that were able to fully control their tailed beast. All Mei and the others knew was that he wielded what seemed to be a large staff, with two hooks on each end, one larger than the other, along with a green flower on the larger end. "Hi, Terumi-sama," Ao said as he and Hisagi saluted before walking back towards their troops. Chuju blushed but saluted as well before leaving Mei and Erasure. "You're positive your plan will work?" asked Mei, turning to the young redhead with steely eyes. "Of course it will," said Erasure. "He's a Jinchuriki, it will work." "I hope so." Just then an explosion went off inside Kiri's walls, then another, and another. Soon they heard shouting and roars as the battle down below began. "I suppose it's time." Erasure nodded and began walking off. "In that case we should head out, we have our own fight to get to." Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Ao and Hisagi could easily pick up the sound of battle as the gates opened up before them. Inside they saw a scene of chaos as kunai and shuriken were tossed, jutsu were launched and explosions rang out. As the two shinobi and their forces entered the base they were met with one of the turncoat ninja who was wearing standard Kirigakure Jonin garb and had a slash through his forehead protector, the sign they decided to go with so they were on the bloodline side. "Report," barked Ao as he began to take charge. "All of the explosions went off as planned," the shinobi said. "We managed to inflict maximum damage on the Yagura's biggest supporters and so far there has been no damage to the civilian section of the city. We estimate that we managed to take out a total of 1/4 of Yagura's troops already." "Excellent," Ao said, "in that case we'll be joining this battle with you." The shinobi nodded before he fell in with the many troops that the bloodline side brought. Hisagi turned to Ao with a grim smile. "You ready?" "I'm always ready, boy," Ao said as he, "Back in my day we always had to be ready for battle." "Right," Hisagi said as he pulled out his katana. The two of them rushed into the city proper with their ninja and began to battle. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Chujiro frowned as he entered the building where Jinin was said to live in, only to find nothing there. He walked further into the building, noting that he was in the main entrance, which seemed to be somewhat similar to a living room, only empty. Just as he was walking further in his instincts had him jumping to his left just in time to dodge a large blur that smashed into the floor where he had been standing. Looking over, Chujiro saw that he had finally found the person he was looking for, or would it be more accurate to say that person found him? Jinin had a dark beard and hair which he had tied into a topknot. The remainder of his face appeared to be rather angular and featured a very protuberant nose. He was wearing a dark-colored poncho cloth over his standard swordsman attire, consisting of a sleeveless dark shirt and matching pants along with a waistguard, pinstriped arm and leg warmers typical of his village and Kirigakure's forehead protector. He also had bandages around his neck. His sword was the Kabutawari, literally meaning, helmet splitter, is one of the swords of the Kiri Shinobigatana Nananin Shu. The sword itself consists of a giant axe and hammer, linked end-to-end by a flat thin leather-like rope, which together are referred to as a blunt sword, danto, that is said to be able to break through any defense. "Well, if it isn't little Chujiro," the man said in a congenial voice, "The last I saw of you, you were on your way towards becoming one of the new 7 swordsmen." "Jinin-senpai," Chujiro said in what he hoped was a confident voice. "Ha ha ha, you're still the same as ever, kid," Jinin said as he readied his sword. "You'll never beat me with that kind of underconfident attitude." The last loyal swordsman of the mist charged at Chujiro, the axe part of his sword lifted over his shoulder before he swung it down. Chujiro dodged, only to have the hammer part of the blade coming straight at him. Story of the 10-tailed wolf. With all the chaos going around, Erasure and Mei had an easier time of getting to the Mizuki's mansion than they had expected. Of course, given that they had specifically told the ninja who had planted 2 explosives to leave the Mizuki's residence alone, maybe it wasn't all that surprising. Mei went over to the door and pulled on it, but had no success of opening it. "It's locked," she muttered. Turning to Erasure, who smirked. "Leave it to me," he said as he lifted his hand and grasped his sword. Because he had not wanted to waste time having to summon his blade every time he used it in battle, he had one of the blacksmiths that worked to make the Bloodline faction's weapons build him a sheath. The sheath was actually made of leather with a slick metal coating the inside. It was pure black in color, but with golden diamond pattern running along its length. At the end of the sheath, near the hilt of his sword, was a golden wolf, howling. It was a very special sheath, especially since Erasure had placed several seals on it underneath the paint. He pulled out his sword and in one fluid motion made a downward slice. There was a flash of light that signified the blade's movement before Erasure resheathed the sword. The blade made a clicking noise as it settled into the sheath. At the same time as the noise was made, the door fell apart, showing that it had been cut into multiple pieces. "There, now for the fun part," Erasure muttered as the 2 of them entered side by side, ready for anything that they may run into. The first room they had entered appeared to be a reception room. It was large, with several tables, chairs and couches placed along the wall. Near the front was a desk with a staircase on one side and a large set of double doors on the other. "The doors lead to the room where the Kirigakure Council used to meet," said Mei. "Then I'm guessing the stairs leads to Yagura's place." "Yes, the entire 2nd and 3rd floor lead to Yagura's mansion," Mei nodded. "The 2nd floor holds his house, 12 rooms consisting 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a study, a library, and a dojo. The 3rd floor is where Yagura's office is." "You seem to know your way around," Erasure said as they began walking upstairs. "Before the Bloodline Wars began, my father spent a lot of time here," Mei admitted. "He would often take me with him, so I know a lot about the layout of this place." "Makes sense," Erasure said. "So, where will we find Yagura?" "I suspect his office." Erasure nodded and the 2 began making their way upstairs. Story of the 10-tailed wolf. Chujiro's eyes widened and he only had a split second to dodge the hammer before it would smash into him. He jumped into the air, and grabbed Hiramakirai by both hilts and released its bandages. He channeled chakra into his dual-handled sword, forming the shape of a giant hammer, and swung it with as much force as he could on his way down. Jinin jumped out of the way as the large chakra hammer smashed into the ground where he was, a good thing for him as the area he was standing exploded and large chunks of the floor were sent flying. A large dust cloud billowed from where Chujiro hit, dispersing only when the blue-haired swordsman ran through it, his sword already changing shape into a large blade. "Ha ha ha. That's it. That's what I'm looking for," Jinin shouted as he jumped out of the way of Chujiro's swing. The large chakra blade sliced through the wall that the other swordsman had been standing behind like it was butter. Jinin came in with his hammer and axe sword ready to strike. "Now we can get to the fun part." Chujiro had only a moment to dodge as Jinin brought his ace down, sidestepping the attack before rolling across the floor as the hammer came down on the flat part of Jinin's hammer, causing the floor to literally split open. In retaliation to the attack, Chujiro came in and swung his own blade, only to have it blocked by Jinin's axe. "Nice try," said the man before he brought his hammer and smacked Chujiro's blade, causing the blue-haired swordsman to lose his balance, but not nice enough. Jinin swung his hammer down again as Chujiro tried to bring his sword to bear, knowing he wouldn't be able to dodge. The hammer struck his blade and the younger swordsman winced as he was sent flying back. He landed on the ground some feet away and had to push himself back up. Standing on his feet, Chujiro swayed a little before he could shake off the powerful blow. Looking up, he was just in time to Jinin coming back at him, his axe coming in swinging while he held his hammer above his head. Chujiro swung his Hiramakari back and channeled more chakra into his blade, morphing its shape into a maze. He swung it forward just as Jinin brought his axe down. The two blades struck each other, causing a massive explosion between them due to the force behind their attacks. Both of the swordsmen were blown back, channeling chakra to the bottom of their feet so they wouldn't skid across the ground for the resounding shock wave their clash evoked. "Huh, you've gotten pretty good with that sword," Jinin complimented with a grin, "that should make this battle that much more exciting." Chujiro grit his teeth as the other swordsman charged towards him. He knew he couldn't afford to stay on the defensive like he had indefinitely, yet he didn't know what he could do to catch the older and more experienced ninja off guard. The man was extremely skilled at using the axe and hammer in conjunction with each other. Also, the sword's Kabutawari's construction allowed the weapons to retain their individual capabilities, and thanks to Jinin's expertise, both the axe and the hammer can be exploited to their fullest. Even though he knew that the older man was stronger than him, stronger and more experienced, Chujiro had no intention of giving up. He gripped his sword by both handles and charged, swinging down at Jinin, who raised his axe to block it. At the last second, Chujiro channeled chakra into his blade, creating a large scythe. Because the scythe's blade stuck out nearly 2 feet out from the sword itself, the blade continued on unimpeded. Jinin's eyes widened as he saw the scythe coming towards him. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. After reaching the 3rd floor, Erasure and Mei found themselves walking along a long corridor. It was dark, and the only light available was the small lamps located on the wall. Erasure had a hand on his Ukami Hitokage while Mei was holding a hand seal in case she needed to shoot of a quick jutsu. Both were feeling weary. They had been walking through the mansion and had yet to run into the Mizukage or anyone else. Neither had been sure what to expect, but they had not expected to just be allowed to walk anywhere in the house. At the end of the corridor they came upon a plain, white door. "This is where the Mizukage's office is located," Mei whispered. "And you think he's in there?" asked Erasure, gripping his blade a little tighter. "He's in there all right, Naruto-kun," came a voice from within his seal. "Akane-kan? I can sense the Sanbai's presence, he's in there. There really isn't anywhere else I can imagine him being." Mei's voice snapped Erasure out of his inner dialogue, and he realized that the auburn-haired woman had been talking. "We would have known if he had joined the battle, and we haven't seen him anywhere else in the Mizukage mansion. He has to be in here." "Right," Erasure moved and grabbed onto the door handle. He looked over at Mei, who gave him a nod and in one swift motion, opened the door and ran in. "You took your time getting here." Erasure stared at the man standing before him as Mei also entered. The person had his back turned to them and was looking out of the window. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to get here." "Yagura," Mei said in a tense voice. Yagura turned around, giving Erasure the chance to study the man he had heard so much about. Yagura had messy gray hair, pink pupilless eyes, and what seemed to be a stitch-like scar running from under his left eye all the way down his cheek. He had a dull expression and was wearing a gray undershirt with short mesh sleeves which had a metal plate of a Kirigakure forehead protector sewn onto it, over which he also wore a green poncho, a turquoise sash around his waist, paired with a green indument over his pants. He had on a pair of brown boots opened on the back, and on his back he was carrying a staff-like pole weapon with uneven hooks with a green flower on the end of the larger hook. "Mei-san, this is a pleasant surprise." Erasure found it odd that the man actually sounded pleased to see Mei, and not in the psychotic "I'm going to kill you" way, but in the "oh, it's really good to see a friend" way. "I trust you have been doing well." "I suppose you could say that," Mei said with a harsh glare. "If by doing well you mean watching as a man you once respected more than anyone else go about butchering his own people, then yes, I have been doing well. I only do what I must to protect those who do not wish for war," Yagura said. "Those who do not wish for war," Mei muttered angrily before shouting, How can you possibly say that when this entire war is your fault? Everything that happened to Kirigakure is because of you. The Kagaya massacre, Zabuza's coup, the rebellion, it's all your fault. No, my dear girl, it's only the fault of the people who hold Kekkei Genkei, Yagura said. The monsters who are used in war. They're used in war because people like you start war. Mei yelled angrily. She went through several hand seals, ending on a tiger seal. I'm done talking to you. Yotan, Utama, lava release, lava globs. Mei's cheeks bulged before she spat out several large globs of lava, all of them heading straight towards Yagura. Mei's cheeks bulged before she spat out several large globs of lava, all of them heading straight towards Yagura. Before they could reach the gray-haired young man, however, the young Mizuki's own cheeks bulged, right before he let loose with a large torrent of water that smashed into the large globs of lava. The lava not only hardened into rock, but the water technique was so powerful that the hardened rock was annihilated before the jet of water continued on towards Mei and Erishur. Both of them jumped out of the way, letting the water smash the wall behind them, destroying it. Erishur was shocked at the amount of damage that single attack had done. Not only had Yagura's water technique completely overpowered Mei's lava globs, but the water had been strong enough to continue on and destroy a wall that Mei told him was reinforced with chakra-enhanced brick. It's the Sanbai, Akane told him even as Naruto began going through several hand seals and shot out a ball of lightning. Yagura saw it coming and dodged out of the way, only to run afoul of more lava globs from Mei. He quickly replaced himself with his chair and shot out several powerful water bullets at the auburn-haired woman, who dodged them accordingly. The Sanbai has ultimate power over water, so you can expect all of his water jutsu to be supercharged. Oh, well that's just great, Erishur thought sarcastically as he went through several more hand seals and smashed his hands on the ground. Lightning arched out of his hands and raced towards Yagura, who jumped into the air in order to dodge the lightning attacks. However, it seemed he had forgotten about Mei, who had already gone through her hand seals and was just waiting for a chance to launch her jutsu. Yotan, Kyotama, lava release, large lava ball. Mei shot out a large glob of lava that formed itself into a ball as it traveled towards Yagura. Just as it looked like it was about to consume the Mizuki, however, the entire ball of molten rock dispersed, starting from the center where a condensed ball of water was seen speeding towards Mei. Damn it, the rebel leader jumped out of the way just before the ball hit her, letting it strike the ground. This proved to be a good thing, for as soon as the ball hit the floor it ended up blasting straight through it, emitting a loud crack as it busted through wood and brick. Unbelievable, muttered Erishur. He managed to shoot off a ball of water so condensed that it not only destroyed Mei's jutsu, but also passed right through it like it wasn't even there. Not only that, but it still had enough power to plow through an entire floor. If this is the power of its Jinchuriki, then I'd hate to see what kind of power the Sanbai has. Not one to sit by, Erishur moved forward and attempted to engage the man in taijutsu. He soon found out this was a mistake. The moment his fist made contact with Yagura's face it felt like he had hit steel. Pulling back he saw that the left half of the Mizuki's face now looked like a miniature Sanbai, complete with the spiky horned head, jutting jaws and glowing red eyes. Oh shit! Erishur shouted as Yagura's left arm likewise turned into armored and clawed hand, smacking him away. The red head smashed into a wall, causing a large crater to form before he fell down. Note to self: never fight a Jinchuriki who can turn parts of his body into a hardened turtle in close combat. He looked up and saw Yagura being firing water bullets at Mei and became a mere blur as he ran towards the attack. He appeared in front of the auburn-haired woman and went through several hand seals. Opening his mouth he fired off several powerful blasts of lightning that struck the water bullets one by one, destroying them before they could get near either of them. Mei capitulated on the small lull in combat that caused and went through more hand seals. Yotan, Yusen, lava release, lava beam, a condensed beam of lava, that looked more like some kind of laser beam, shot from Mei's mouth and raced towards Yagura. As it reached the Mizuki, a wall of water appeared out of thin air to protect the gray-haired man. However, it didn't seem to do anything as the beam continued on unimpeded. When the water dispersed, both May and Erasure frowned as they saw no trace of the Yonde Mizukic. "Where did he go?" asked May, looking around in an effort to spot him. Erasure likewise was scanning the room with his eyes, hoping to find some trace of Yugura. However, he could find no trace of the man. "He's below you." Arashi's eyes widened and he reacted to the words on instinct, grabbing May and jumping away from their position just as a large streak of water blew the floor to hell. Large slabs of concrete flew away from the geyser of water and May and Erasure found themselves having to weave through the chunks. Even before the last of the floor had finished its flight, several more geysers began shooting up from the ground. "He's below us!" May shouted as she did her best to dodge the geysers of water that kept sprouting. "No, really? Whatever gave you that idea? Were it not for the fact that he was facing a Jinchuriki Kage," Erasure would have rolled his eyes. He grabbed May by the arm and quickly pulled her across the room, heading towards the large window that Yugura had been looking out of before the battle started. He thrust out his palm and a large blast of wind smashed into the glass, shattering it before he jumped out, pulling May with him. His companions' eyes widened as they found themselves in freefall, but before they could continue plummeting to the ground, Erasure threw his sword. He grabbed onto the chain, which lengthened the further it got from him. The sword impaled itself on the wall and the red head yanked on the chain hard, pulling both him and May towards the Mizukic mansion. They hit the wall and began channeling chakra to their feet in order to stick. "Well, that wasn't very pleasant," May said as Erasure yanked on the chain and pulled his sword back to him, placing it in his sheath. "Let's try not to do that again." "I'll do my best," Erasure said absently as he began to move. "Now let's find him before he finds us." Story of the 10-tailed wolf, ha ha ha. "Yes. That's it!" Jinin exclaimed as Chujiro watched the man in a mix of fascinated horror. There was a large gash going down the side of the man's chest, the wound was deep, with blood flowing out like a river. And yet the man seemed unaffected by the wound, as he let known by his laugh, "This is what I live for." He seemed to come down from his eye and looked at Chujiro, a smirk on his face. "Now, let's get to the true battle." Jinin came at Chujiro, twice as fast as he was before. He swung his axe, forcing the less experienced sword user to block, only to be blown back when the man smashed his hammer on the blunt side of his axe. The force of the blow sent Chujiro sailing backwards and he just barely managed to flip himself around so that his feet was facing the wall. He landed on his feet, channeling chakra to the bottom as he clung to the wall. He looked up and his eyes widened at seeing Jinin already swinging at him. Chujiro jumped off the wall just as the man's axe hit it, getting stuck before he destroyed it using his axe-hammer combination. As Chujiro landed on his feet, the man came at him again and he was forced to dodge, lest he make the same mistake he had the last time he tried to block. A game of cat and mouse began and Chujiro knew he was definitely the mouse. He had no moving room and no time to actually launch an attack or counter-attack to the man, due to how viciously Jinin was fighting him. The few times Chujiro tried to actually use his sword he found that himself having to pull back and dodge. It was as if the man didn't care he died so long as he took his enemies with him. "Come on, Chujiro!" Jinin yelled as he swung his axe again. Chujiro jumped back, he could actually feel the slice the blade made with the air. "You can't win if you keep fighting like a pussy. Fight me for real." Chujiro grit his teeth as he dodged another attack. Gaining some distance, he channeled more chakra to his blade, forming a large blue hammer that almost looked similar to Jinin's, only on several orders of the magnitude larger. With a loud yell he slammed the hammer into the ground, causing the floor to split and chuck of ground, as well as create an effective smoke screen. "Well, this is more like it," Jinin said, right as Chujiro came out of the dust, his chakra hammer already in motion. Chujiro swung once again, forcing Jinin to block, only to be surprised when he was blown back. He managed to right himself while in mid-air and landed on the ground, skidding backwards for several feet. When he finally stopped and looked up, it was to see Chujiro already swinging at him. Smirking, he brought up his axe and blocked the strike, then he smashed the blunt end of his axe with his hammer. However, by that time Chujiro had already backed off, making Jinin lose his balance. He did his best to correct himself as Chujiro came in with another heavy-handed swing. Having no time to dodge, Jinin was forced to block. He lifted his blade just in time to have it take the blow for him and was sent flying back. Ha landed on the wall and used chakra to cling to it. "It seems you were holding back on me," he told Chujiro, who was sweating and breathing heavily after having used so much chakra. "That's good, I just hope you can keep this up." "Two won't let Mei-sama down," Chujiro said as he hefted his blade. "I will defeat you." "Mei-sama?" Jinin questioned, before smirking. "Does Chujiro have a little crush on the alliance leader?" "Ha ha ha. Well, she is quite the looker, so I can't blame you. I would try and get with her myself if she weren't Mizuki-sama's enemy." The man readied his blade. "Well, whatever, we're not here to talk about your love life, we're here to fight. Now come at me with all you've got." He pushed himself off the wall, flying towards Chujiro so quickly you could only see a slight blur. Chujiro readied his blade, making a sword nearly 3 times larger than his current one with his chakra. He would only have one shot at this, so he had to make it count. As Jinin came in and swung at him, Chujiro jumped, pushing himself as high into the air as he could go and flipping over the more experienced swordsman. As he came down, Chujiro swung his blade with a loud yell. He could see the other man's eyes widen even as Jinin brought up both his axe and blade to block. There was a loud crash as the two forces met, an explosion of energy from the blades opposing each other. Dust was kicked up, making it impossible to see the victor. When it finally dissipated, it showed the two standing there. Chujiro hunched over with his blade set into the ground, a large gash where it sat. His hands were on the handle and he was breathing heavily, with shaking arms and sweat pouring down his face. Jinin watched as the handles for his two blades split apart. "Hee, nice," he said as blood began to spray out of his face. He fell backwards, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Chujiro looked at the man and saw that his eyes had filmed over and he wasn't breathing. "I won." Chujiro slumped to the floor as exhaustion set in. "I can't believe I won." Story of the 10-tailed wolf. Erasure and Mei soon found themselves locked in battle with the Yondaime Mizuki once again. After they managed to climb back inside of the Mizuki mansion via one of the many windows, they had searched out Yagura and found him inside of the room right below his office. That was when the battle had truly begun in earnest. Katan, Karyu Enden, Fire Release, Fire Dragon Flame Bullet. Mei had sped through several hand seals before launching out a large flame that soon took the shape from a dragon. As it charged, the flames divided and were launched in 3 different directions at once, the left side, right side, and another flame that went in for a frontal assault. However, Yagura merely raised his hands as if he were about to conduct an orchestra. Water soon appeared out of thin air and began forming a vortex around his person. The flames hit the water, hissing as the two jutsu created a lot of steam. By this time Erasure had finished his own hand signs and used one of the jutsu he knew but hadn't quite mastered yet, Raitun, Kuropansa, Lightning Release, Black Panther. A large black panther-like creature launched itself from Arashi's body and charged into the mist. There was a large explosion that caused the white mist created from the fire and water jutsu to get blown away, revealing that Yagura was no longer there. The two partners narrowed their eyes and jumped out of the way just in time to dodge a large water dragon that smashed into the ground and tore through the floor, leaving them with a view of the council room below. They looked up to see Yagura was on the ceiling. The man's cheeks bulged and he spat out several large water bullets. As Mei jumped away, Erasure unsheathed his sword and got into a stance with his feet spread apart and his blade near his face with the edge pointed skyward. Uzumaki Hijitsu, Yamaten, Kaitana, Uzumaki Secret Technique, Dark Release, Cutting Blade, slashing his sword in a horizontal swing, a large, black crescent moon-shaped blade of chakra was released from the blade. It smashed straight into the water bullets, cutting through them as if they weren't even there and moving on towards Yagura. Or at least, where Yagura had been. Before Erasure had even launched his jutsu, Yagura had moved, and so rather than cut into the Jinchuriki Kage, they sliced through the roof and continued on its way to impact against the third-floor roof before cutting through that. So you're an Uzumaki? Arashi's eyes widened as he spun around and just barely blocked a blow from Yagura's staff. This is most interesting. Didn't you think there were any of you left, the Sanbai Jinchuriki said as he slid his staff down the length of Ukami Hidokichi's blade, before catching the hilt with his hook and pulling. Realizing what was about to happen, Erasure let go of his blade and grabbed onto the chain at the end. When Yagura pulled, the blade went flying away, but the length of the chain extended, allowing Erasure to pull the blade back, even as he jumped away from the Yondaime Mizukichi who tried to gut him with one of the hooks on his staff. Katan, Goryuka no Jutsu, Fire Release, Great Dragon Fire Technique. Mei compressed a large amount of chakra inside of her body before releasing a large fireball in the shape of the dragon. Erasure had already jumped out of the way, allowing it to head right for Yagura. Not quite finished yet, Mei launched several more of the great dragon-shaped fireballs, all of them heading towards the Mizukichi. Yagura began to move, running up the walls and onto the ceiling as the techniques smashed into the wall he was at, destroying it so utterly that there was nothing left. The explosion from the jutsu sent Erasure skidding back before he could channel chakra to his feet and stick to the ground. He cursed himself for having not moved far enough away. Aside from being forced back, he also felt the front side of his face getting second-degree burns. He could only consider himself lucky that his body had a natural predisposition against fire thanks to Akane. Mei soon jumped next to him, breathing heavily from the battle so far. "Are you all right?" she asked, having seen him get nearly hit from her jutsu. "Yeah, I'm fine, but this building's not," Erasure said, not even deigning to look at Mei as he kept all of his attention focused on Yagura who was still standing on the ceiling. "We need to take this somewhere else or this entire building will collapse around our ears." "Then we need to lead him away somehow," Mei said. "Or push him out," Erasure muttered as he got a look in his eyes. "Mei, I need you to start firing jutsu at him, get him near one of the windows." Mei looked at him out of the corner of her eyes. At seeing the slight glint in his eyes she nodded and began going through hand seals. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu, Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique. Mei shot a large fireball at Yagura, whose cheeks began to bulge and he countered by launching a powerful jet-like stream of water at the jutsu. Mei cursed as she was forced to dodge the water as it went through her technique like it was made of paper. She began more hand seals, then held a hand to her mouth. Katan, Hozenka no Jutsu, Fire Release, Phoenix Sage Fire Technique. Mei shot several small flames, nearly twice the size of her head, out of her mouth. They soared towards Yagura who tried to shoot them down with water bullets. However, Mei, who thanks to having to train with fire nature chakra at a young age due to her Kekkei Genkei, was a master of the fire element. She took direct control of the fireballs with her chakra and had them dodge the water bullets. Yagura was forced to dodge the many fireballs, running along the ceiling as they hit the ground, or ceiling, behind him. Each time she ran out of fireballs, Mei would launch the jutsu again, making sure that the Yondaime Mizukichi never had a moment to actually launch any attacks at her or Erasure. She stopped when the man ended up standing in front of one of the windows. She did this because Erasure was already right in front of Yagura, his sword in mid-swing and glowing with Haitan chakra. Uzumaki Hijitsu, Haitan, Hyoshi, Uzumaki Secret Technique, Light Release, Light Push. The Yondaime Mizukichi managed to lift his staff to block. The moment blade met staff, Ukami Hidokichi released a powerful, bright light that spread out in a ripple pattern before getting sucked back into the blade and releasing a powerful shock wave in Yagura's direction. The Yondaime Mizukichi was sent flying away from Erasure, smashing into and through the window, causing the glass to shatter as he fell to the streets below. "Well, that was fun," Erasure said as he took several huffing breaths. "If you think this is enjoyable, I don't really think I like your idea of fun," Mei said as she stood beside him. Erasure smirked. "Bah, beating up Kages is a hobby of mine." At least, I think I'll make it a hobby of mine when this is all over. He stepped onto the ledge and looked at May with a grin. Well, let's not keep the man waiting. With that he jumped out of the window and fell down to the ground below, flipping mid-leap before landing on his feet. He stood up just as May landed beside him and they looked over to see Yugura stopping out of a building where the wall collapsed. Damn, I didn't think my technique was strong enough to toss him through a building. May rolled her eyes while Yugura stared at them impassively. Your abilities are impressive, I must commend you on making it this far. Dark blue Yuki began to leak from his body, surrounding him and gaining 3 large shrimp-like tails. However, it's time to end this. I really hope you know what you're doing, May said to Erishur as she prepared for battle. Erishur grinned as he pulled out his blade. Relax, of course I do, I think. That's not what I wanted to hear, May said. You know, if you weren't so cute I would melt you for saying things like that. Whatever, just get ready. Erishur moved into his stance just as the Jinchuriki-cloaked Yugura burst forward. However, the way he was moving was far different than normal. Instead of running towards, the Mizukage was literally creating water as he skated along the surface. Damn, that's some serious chakra nature manipulation there. It's too bad I'm not a water user. Uzumaki Hijitsu, Yamaten, Kaduran, Uzumaki secret technique, dark release, great upheaval, slamming his blade into the ground. Erishur caused the entire earth before him to split apart. Dark pillars of chakra burst forth in front of Yugura, who was forced to stop his head on assault and jump back. The pillars blocked his view of the two, and when they died down he saw that May and Erishur were jumping away on the rooftops. Yugura frowned before he followed after them. The two shinobi ran towards the outer walls of Kiri, pushing chakra to their legs in order to increase their speed. Erishur looked behind him to see Yugura gaining and growled as he went through several hand seals. When he got to the last seal he jumped in the air and spun around, shooting out a large bolt of lightning before finishing his rotation and continuing his run. Yugura had been forced to dodge the lightning jutsu as it was his Biju's elemental weakness and thus, his elemental weakness. This allowed May and Erishur to gain some more distance from him and they managed to make it to the wall. They jumped off the building they were on and spun their bodies so that they hit the wall with their feet, and then they began to run up the wall, moving over it and heading out towards the bluff where their ninja had been just prior to the battle. They both stopped and turned as Yugura made his way towards them. So you both decided to stop running, he said. Oh, we were never running to begin with, Erishur commented lightly. We just wanted to make sure there was nothing in the way of this battle, wouldn't want to kill any of the innocent citizens of Kiri just to take out a piece of trash like you. I'm grateful that you did that, Yugura said as the Yuki around him grew even more. After all, that means I don't have to hold back. He threw his hand out, it grew into the 3-tailed hand and he slammed it into the ground where May and Erishur were standing. Both of them jumped out of the way, splitting up as they went through individual hand seals. Doton, Doryuden, Earth Release, Earth Dragon Bullet. A large dragon-like head rose out of the ground next to May and fired several concentrated bullets of mud. A few seconds later Erishur shot a large blast of fire out of his mouth, combining his flame technique with May's earth technique. The now flaming projectiles were launched at Yugura, whose only response was to smash them with an enlarged sanbai hand. Seeing how ineffective their attack was, May and Erishur decided to pull out their more powerful techniques. Katan, Goryuka no Jutsu. Once again May began shooting out the 30-foot diameter fireball dragons that were all launched at Yugura, who responded by creating a large wave of water in front of him, nearly 60 feet tall and 70 feet wide. As soon as the large dragons came in the water collapsed on top of them, snuffing the fireballs out and forcing May to jump as the water continued towards her. She landed on the water, which began to pour over the edge of the bluff as well as down the hill towards the tree line. Before it could get too far Erishur appeared on top of it and stuck his hands in the water, sending a powerful burst of electricity towards Yugura. The red head was ecstatic to see one of his attacks finally strike gold. As Yugura let loose a scream of agony, white bolts of electricity traveled over his body. Thanks to the sanbai being water element, his lightning attack was 10 times more effective against Yagura than it would be on anyone else. Not wanting to let up his assault, Erashur went through several more hand seals. Opening his mouth, a large bolt of lightning shot out and sped towards Igaura, with bolts of the errant energy striking and tearing up the ground as it moved. It was unfortunate for Erashur that Yagura managed to recover before the lightning jutsu could make it to him, and he was able to jump out of the way. In retaliation for the attack, he shot several large, nearly twice the size of a human, water bullets at Erashur. "Damn it," the redhead shouted as he went through a series of hand seals. He crossed his arms and then waved them in an X pattern. Large green blades of wind chakra shot towards one of the water bullets, cutting straight through it and allowing Erashur to jump at that spot, dodging the other large water attacks. A good thing too, as the water bullets he didn't hit smashed into the ground and had enough force behind them to leave large craters that soon began to fill with mud. Erashur landed on the ground and sighed in relief, thinking he was safe for the moment. That thought was soon dashed as Yagura shot a water javelin at him. A look of shock came to Arashi's face as the javelin pierced his chest, only for him to burst into a puff of smoke. Yagura's eyes actually widened in surprise, and it was that single moment of surprise that allowed Mei to get behind him undetected and launch a powerful kick to the back of his head. The gray-haired Kage was sent flying parallel to the ground. In front of him Erashur appeared, planting a hand on the ground and launching a powerful kick to his face, changing the course of Yagura's body and sending him into the air. As he reached the apex of his climb, another Erashur appeared above him. This one spun around, lightning forming around and foot and taking the shape of a wolf as he launched an axe kick on the Mizuki's head. Yagura screamed in pain, even as he was sent sailing into the ground. When he hit, there was a large explosion of dust and rock, making it impossible to see if Yagura had been defeated. Erashur landed on the ground and dropped to one knee, panting. He was really hoping that had put the gray-haired kid down. This fight had been going for a long time, well over an hour, and he was beginning to tire. Just as he thought this, an infusion of energy rushed through him. He smiled, knowing who was helping him refill his reserves. "Thanks Akane-kan. Anytime." "Do you think we got him?" asked Mei as she came up alongside of him. "Kami, I hope so," Erashur said jokingly. "I don't know if I have it in me to go another round." Just as he spoke, Akane's voice came to him in an urgent yell, "Naruto-kun. He's not dead." Arashi's eyes widened, and he had just enough time to grab Mei just as a large explosion of Yuki came out of the crater. The two of them were able to bear witness as out of the crater, Yagura's body began to groan and expand. His body turned in grayish-blue as his limbs began to grow. At the same time, large armor plates started protruding out of the skin while a spiky shell formed along the middle. This was soon followed by 3 large tails whipping out behind it, just as a large head sprouted out from the neck. Both of them looked up to see a sight that had sent many shinobi running and cowering in fear. Dwarfing over the two of them, standing even larger than the Mizuki mansion, the Sanbai no Kaiodegame stood in front of the two ninja. The Sanbai primarily resembled a large turtle, but with a crab-like shell, and 3 shrimp-like tails. It had a pair of human-like arms and hands, but no hind legs. Its right eye was constantly closed, indicating some sort of possible injury. At least, Erashur hoped it had some kind of injury, because he couldn't see any other weak point on the hardened carapace. "Erashur," Mei said quietly as she stared at the large creature, "I hope you have a plan for defeating this." Erashur gave a weak chuckle. "Get a really big hammer to crack its shell." Story of the 10-tailed wolf. Down in the village below, the fighting had already stopped. With the aid of the turncoats to the Mizuki, the bloodline faction had won with minimum casualties suffered. Now the two groups that had joined forces were busy getting all those who were injured to the medical station that had been set up just inside the village walls, clearing away debris and getting an estimate on the casualties that both sides had suffered. The Mizuki's forces who had not joined them were currently being contained to one of the more confined areas of the village, where Mei would hopefully decide on what should be done with them. It was at that moment that a foul chakra descended upon the village, so powerful was this chakra and killing intent that several of the lower-ranked ninja dropped to their knees and began shaking. Many of the jonin looked around, wide-eyed, wondering what could possibly emit such a vile chakra. Hisagi! Ao shouted, gaining the tall man's attention. He pointed up towards the bluff they had been standing on before the assault began, up there. Many of the other ninja looked up and gasped at the sight of the sandbai on the bluff. Terumi-sama and Arashizan are up there fighting that thing. What? Hisagi shouted. What do they think they're doing? Everyone knows you can't fight a Jinchuriki when it's using the full power of their bijou. He looked up at where the sandbai was and saw a large wall being raised up, blocking it from view. Damn it! What should we do? Nothing, Ao sighed tiredly, even as Hisagi tossed him an incredulous look. There isn't anything we can do. If we tried to help them, we'd just get in the way. Hisagi didn't like hearing that, but he knew that it was the truth. Damn, Erasure, if you and Mei don't get out of this alive, I'll drag you back from hell and beat the shit out of you. Story of the 10-tailed wolf. Okay. Mei huffed as she pulled her hands off the giant earth wall she had made. The entirety of the wall, nearly 80 feet tall, 15 feet thick, and covered the entire cliff side. That way if the sandbai used a large-scale jutsu it wouldn't fall over and destroy Kiri. Mei turned to look at Erasure. Now what? Now we need to herd it into the ocean somehow, Erasure said. Are you mad? Asked Mei. That thing is a water demon. They thrive in the water. Yes, but I have a lightning element, so I'll have an advantage, Erasure shot back. It won't matter where he is in the water, all I have to do is channel some electricity and I can injure him. Mei sighed and muttered, I can't believe I'm going through with this. She looked at Erasure. Okay, so what do we do? You have a strong water element, use the biggest and area-wide jutsu you have. Right, Mei began going through several hand seals as she stared at the sandbai that had been oddly quiet. Suetun, Daibakufu no Jutsu, water release, great waterfall technique. A large amount of water rose from the ground, extending over a large scale. It surged and rose up to several dozen meters high. Then it streamed down to the ground in one big cascade, much like a gigantic waterfall. In truth, the jutsu looked more like a tidal wave than a waterfall as its name suggested. The jutsu smashed straight into the sandbai, who roared, sounding more out of annoyance and anger than anything else. The amount of water that the jutsu used actually held enough force to lift the giant turtle and send it down the slope of the cliff, crushing the trees that were in its path. And when the jutsu ended, the entire land looked like it had been struck by a natural disaster. Mei dropped to knees as she let the jutsu end. There, it's done. Are you alright? Asked Erasure. I'm fine, Mei replied, still breathing heavily. I don't have much chakra left however. Then stay here, said Erasure, I'll finish this. Before Mei could even respond, the redhead had jumped off of the wall. He hit the ground and pushed himself into a sprint as he ran down the slope, towards the edge of the island. What's the plan? Asked Akane as she watched the events through his eyes. I'm going to need your help, Erasure said. No human can stand up to a bijou, so I'm going to need your help to deal with this. I didn't want to rely on you in front of Mei, however. The last thing we need is to have our cover blown because I used your yuki. Good thinking, Akane said. Don't worry, I'll be here to help as always. Thanks. Erasure ran onto the water and not even a second later the sandbai burst out of the water, snapping at Erasure with his jaws. However, the redhead was more than up to the task of dodging, jumping high into the air before shooting a large wind bullet from his mouth. The wind bullet smacked into the giant turtle, and though it didn't do much damage, it did a good job of pushing the bijou back into the water. How much of your yuki do you suggest I use? Asked Erasure. Akane took a moment to think before giving her answer. Well, 6 of my tails have fully integrated with you, so you can use that many. However, if you were to do that, it would alert the humans to my presence. I would suggest 3, the use of 3 should be masked by the Sanbai's presence, and you'll be stronger at 3 tails than he is anyways. Got it, juice me. Erashur could feel Akane pouring Yuki through the seal. A red filmy haze covered his form, his nails, both feet and toenails lengthened into claws, his canines became fangs, the hair on his head began to look even more spiky and hard and his whiskers thickened, making his appearance look feral. The eyes remained unchanged for the most part, they were still a deep blue color, however black slits ran down the middle. You're set, I'll do what I can to direct the Yuki since you have no real experience in using my power, Akane said. Thanks. Erashur watched as a large beam of water shot out from the Sanbai's mouth. The attack was easy enough to dodge, Erashur merely jumped out of the way. Opening his mouth he released a loud roar that created a shock wave. The shock wave smashed into the Sanbai, causing it to roar out in pain and anger. It glared at Erashur balefully and this time shot 2 water beams at him. Those were also dodged as Erashur began to move in close. A giant hand came up and tried to swat him away, but he skated to the left and then jumped on the hand. Holding up his left hand Erashur formed a spinning sphere of red Yuki, Rasjanan, smashing the Yuki onto the Sanbai's hand. The red head watched as his jutsu began to drill through. Yeah. Not so tough are you now, you son of bitch. The Sanbai roared and tried to get Erashur off by smashing his hand into the water. However, by that time Erashur had already abandoned ship, as it were, and had opened his mouth as Akane began channeling mass amounts of Yuki to his throat. Kitsunabe, a massive white beam of concentrated flames shot forward, smashing into the Sanbai. The effects of the attack were fascinating. The Sanbai was a demon of water, due to fire being weak against water, most fire jutsu would never work against a being like the 3 tails. Unfortunately for the Sanbai, Kyuubi's attacks were far more than just fire. The Kitsunabe produced the hottest flame that could be found on the mortal plane, even the underworld's flames could not match hers. Only the sun goddess, Amaterasu herself, could match and overpower the flames of Kyuubi. As such, despite the Sanbai's element being water, the white flames were not only enough to hurt it, but Erashur could see the armored shell where the attack had hit was literally melting. Roaring in anger, the massive beast dunked itself under the water to try and dispel the flame. It worked, as even a Kitsunabe couldn't last underwater. However, the damage had already been done. When the Sanbai came back up, Erashur could clearly see the large melted circle in the shell from his attack. That will be his weak spot, Akane told Erashur, if you can hit that area with a high-powered concentrated attack you can beat him. Oh, well, just let me dig into my super bijou killing jutsu and see what I can dig up, Erashur replied, somewhat sarcastically. Don't get him wrong, he had quite a few high-powered jutsu, most of the ninjutsu he had been using in his battle would have killed a normal ninja. However, bijou were demons, not just demons but demons that were created by the gods and had special abilities that their gods had given them. Seriously, Akane-kan, how do you expect me to deal a blow severe enough to kill that? Don't worry, Akane said in a slightly carefree tone, I'll think of something for you, just do your thing for now. My thing? Erashur raised an eyebrow, what do you mean my? He stopped his inner dialogue and looked up as a shadow crossed over his face. His eyes widened as he saw one of the Sanbai's large tails bearing down on him. Oh sure, he didn't get to finish as the tail smashed down on top of him. The water was all sucked into that one spot as the Sanbai's tail passed through, right before exploding, sending water up nearly 200 feet into the air. The water was raised so high that even the people in Kiri could see it clear as day. Cough, son of bitch, cough. Erashur pulled himself out of the water and stood back up. If I hadn't moved out of the way for that in time I would have actually died. He looked around and frowned when he didn't see the Sanbai anywhere. Great, he sighed, he must be below me. Just as he finished speaking, Erashur was forced to jump into the air as a large hand tried to crush him. He took a deep breath and breathed out more of Akane's Kitsunabe, however the hand went back into the water before his attack could hit. Landing back on the water's surface, Ereshkigal soon found himself faced with another dilemma. Said dilemma being the three giant tails that had just sprung up from the water's surface and were now rushing down towards him. Motherfucker! Ereshkigal swore as he got the hell out of dodge. As the first tail came down, it created a huge wave, and Ereshkigal found himself being pushed along that wave, trying to keep himself afloat at the top. The second tail was coming in at a horizontal angle, aiming straight at the red head. He jumped over it, but this attack only seemed to be a distraction as a large shadow came over him. Looking up, Ereshkigal swore like no other as he saw a tail coming down on top of him. "Oh no you don't," he thrust out both hands and two large ethereal red claws and, deciding it was better to be safe than sorry, also launched all three of his Yuki tails at the large sandby tail. The claws and tails wrapped around the one from the sandby, and as Ereshkigal landed on the ground he did his best to direct the grappled appendage away from him. It worked, and the tail was sent smashing into the water a meter away from him. As Ereshkigal let the wave roll under him, he wondered how the hell he was going to beat this thing. "I've got it. Akane. I'm going to take direct control of the Yuki Naruto-kun, just continue dodging, and when my attack is ready, follow my instructions. I suppose it's the best plan we've got." Ereshkigal soon found himself jumping and running all over the water as he dodged tails and hands alike. Large crescent waves were created from their battle as the sandby continued trying to squash him like a bug. As the battle continued to wear on, Ereshkigal was left wondering what Akane was waiting for. Then the sandby's head came out, as if to see why it hadn't been able to kill him yet. The three tails of Arashi's Kyubi cloak suddenly lashed out, expanding as they wrapped around the giant turtle's horned head. The sandby roared as it tried to rip the tails off by jerking its entire body, but the tails hung on doggedly. With a great heave, the three tails managed to yank the rest of the sandby's body up, revealing the large, gaping hole in its shell. "Naruto-kun, open your mouth." Doing as told, Arashi's mouth opened wide and one of the tails detached itself from the sandby and placed its tip in front of him. Swirling Yuki formed in front of him, a mixture of white and black energy that took the shape of an extremely compressed ball of condensed Yuki. Ereshkigal had no clue what this was, but just from the sheer amount of energy inside of that ball he knew it was powerful. "Swallow it." "What? Swallow it? This thing looks like it will blow me up from the inside," Ereshkigal argued. "Gur, we don't have time for you to be complaining, just swallow it." Hearing that annoyance in Akane's voice, the redhead did as told and swallowed the ball of Yuki. Almost as soon he felt his body trying to expand and blow up. It was eased when he felt Akane's Yuki protecting him, but it still hurt. Then he felt the energy shooting towards his throat and, not wanting to have his head blown off by that kind of power, he opened his mouth. A condensed beam shot out from his mouth, condensed being a relative term as the beam was nearly 20 feet in diameter. Ereshkigal aimed it at the hole in the sandby's shell and watched as the beam blew right through it. The bijou roared in agony as the Kyubi's energy ripped through it, tearing it out from the inside. Cracks formed along the great beast before, with a large burst of Yuki, the entire bijou exploded. The blast caused a large wave, that was bigger than any Ereshkigal had seen from the jutsu used in this battle yet. It expanded in all directions, and all he could do as the jutsu toppled over him as curl himself into a ball before it crashed down. He felt himself tumbling and rolling within the wave as it swept him away. It seemed like hours, but in truth was only a few minutes before Ereshkigal found himself smacking against the shore and tumbling along the ground as the water continued to move. When the water left, the red head was left gasping for breath as he closed his eyes and tried not to vomit. His entire body was aching, his muscles and bones felt like they had been smacked around by Tsunade Senju right before he had. Someone dropped the Hokage monument on him. He could feel all of the tears his muscles had suffered, and he had several tendons that were stretched out and a few that had likely ripped as well. Rolling onto his side, Ereshkigal coughed up blood and realized that he had internal bleeding as well. All in all, he felt worse than shit. "I'll begin healing your body, Naruto-kun," Akane said as she sent gentle soothing waves of Yuki through his battered limbs. Your wounds should finish healing in an hour and you'll be right as rain with a good night's sleep. That's good news at least, Erasure said as he let Akane work her magic. After a few minutes of nothing but laying on the ground looking waterlogged, the redhead was finally able to push himself up. It took a great amount of effort, his legs and arms were shaking from the strain of even standing, but he pushed past the pain and began to walk up the slope. Hopefully he would be able to find a nice bed to sleep on once he got back into Kiri. Erasure, looking up the Uzumaki swordsman blinked as he saw Mei, Ao and Chujiro running towards them while Hisagi merely walked at a glacial pace. What's up? Erasure said with a lazy grin. You look terrible Arashizan, Chujiro said as they got close. Erasure chuckled mirthlessly, well I did just fight a Jinchuriki using the full power of his bijou. You can't expect me to come out of a battle like that looking like a freshly cut daisy. He stumbled a bit as he continued to walk but was caught by Ao and Mei who placed his arms around their shoulders. He smiled at them, thanks. Mei gave him a bright smile, oh don't thank us. It's the least we could do after your battle. She frowned for a moment and looked back at where he had come from, speaking of, what happened to Yagura? Don't know, Erasure grunted, when I used my jutsu and managed to pierce that thing's shell it blew up. He may still be there somewhere, you can have your men search. However, I can guarantee that he is dead. I'll have several men get right on that, Mei said, more to herself than the others, though they heard her perfectly. Anyways, let's get to Kiri and get some rest. I think we've earned it. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. In the following few days a large party had broken out in Kiri to celebrate the end of the Bloodline Civil War. It had been awkward at first, many of the civilians had been unsure what to think about the Kekkei Genkei clans after having been fed anti-bloodline sentiment from Yagura. However, after a few days things righted themselves, the people found that those who held bloodlines were just like they were and after that the party had started. Everyone had gone to the celebration, where they had food and drinks and all kinds of dancing and fun. It was during the second day that Mei had been nominated for Godame Mizukage. As her first order of business Mei set about determining what to do with the prisoners, many of the ninja who had stayed on the side of the Mizukage were staunch bloodline haters, and therefore could not just be released. The new Mizukage decided to solve this problem by deciding to make use of them. All those who had fought against the bloodline side during the last battle were sentenced to life imprisonment and having their chakra sealed, a punishment many on her side felt wasn't enough. However, it was Mei's belief that those who died couldn't properly pay off their debts. The prisoners of war were going to be used as manual labor, it would be their job to repair the village and anything else she felt needed to be done that required the use of hard labor. Some grumbled about that, but even those who wished them dead could see how beneficial using them like that would be. During this time the only person who had nothing to do and didn't feel like joining the party was Erasure. It was the third day of the party and he had finally recovered fully from his exhaustion and the damage he had taken. The nurse who had healed him said he was very lucky to be alive. The redhead had suffered from internal bleeding, had several organs that were supposed to be damaged beyond repair, 3 fractured ribs, one of which had splintered and one of the bones had pierced a lung, the tendons in his legs had been torn and he had suffered a severe concussion. When he had heard the nurse tell him about all the damage he had suffered, Erasure finally realized why he felt like he had spared with Akane for 12 days. What you suffered was nothing, Akane quipped as she heard his thoughts, what you suffered in your battle with the Sanbai is nothing compared to what you would have suffered had you and I sparred. Your injuries were merely flesh wounds. Erasure snorted, right, because almost dying is a flesh wound. Compared to being dead. Akane paused for a second before asking, aren't you going to celebrate with the others? Nope, Erasure said as he walked towards the gate, I don't feel like partying very much. That's probably just because you can't get drunk, Akane teased, I bet if my regeneration didn't affect your ability to get wasted you would be partying harder than anyone else. Bah! Why would I want to get so drunk I couldn't see past my own nose? I don't know, because it's fun. Oh, said Erasure in a teasing voice, has the great and feared Kyubi no Yoko ever gotten wasted? You know I can't, my regenerative abilities prevent it. Erasure just shrugged. He was about to say something else when another voice up, leaving so soon Arashikan. Blinking, Erasure looked up to see Mei standing by the gate out of the village with her by now famous smile on her face. Yeah, he rubbed the back of his head and grinned sheepishly. I've never been comfortable partying, and with the war over there's not much of a need for me now. You know that's not true, Mei said as she walked up to him, her smile still in place. In fact, Kiri could use your help more than ever now. I was hoping you'd be willing to stay and help me bolster the ranks. You know many ninja look up to you. To say that Erasure was stunned would be like saying AO made Mei mildly annoyed. He didn't think, or even really consider the thought that Mei might actually want him to be a ninja for her. The thought was both surprising and surprisingly made him feel wanted, needed. It was a good feeling. However, while a part of me would love to stay with you, I can't, Erasure said, causing Mei's smile to drop into a disappointed frown. I still have a dream that I need to accomplish, and unfortunately I can't do that as a Kirigakure shinobi. I see, Mei said, sounding disappointed before a smile appeared on her face. Well, at least allow me to thank you for all the help you've given my people. Erasure tilted his head in confusion. There's no need to thank me, I had my own, mph. Whatever Erasure had been about to say was cut off by Mei, who had grabbed him by the jacket and slammed her lips against his own. The young and confused redhead had no time to even figure out what happened before a tongue penetrated his mouth and began exploring the inside of his oral passage. It was ultimately feeling Mei's tongue enter his mouth that caused his mind to short-circuit. Inside of the seal Akane could be seen raging across the landscape and destroying the trees in her path as she ranted. How dare that hussy steal my Naruto-kun's first kiss. That stupid, low-down, self-centered bitch. When I get out of this seal I'm going to fucking rip her tits off. Stupid little whore. Kissing my Naruto-kun. Her rant continued along this vein, ranging from swearing enough that any sailor who heard her would likely die from shock, and making threats of bodily harm on the auburn-haired woman that continued to become increasingly violent. When Mei finally disengaged her kiss, Erasure stumbled back, breathing heavily with a large blush on his face and looking extremely confused. What was that for? He asked. That was a thank you, of course, Mei said, smiling brightly as she licked her lips. And, she dropped her voice down to a husky whisper, incentive for you to return sometime. Feeling as if there was nothing left to say, Mei walked past him with a sway of her hips, passing a parting comment for him to not be a stranger, over her shoulder. It took nearly a full 5 minutes before Arashi's mind truly rebooted and he was able to leave, taking off through the gate and heading into the trees. He sped through the woodlands at a pace that would set most ninja to shame, wanting to get to the next island sometime tonight. It wasn't to be, however, as Akane spoke up from the seal. Get in the seal, we need to talk. Akane-kan, said Erasure, wondering if her sounding angry was just his imagination. In the seal, now. Yes ma'am, not wanting to anger Akane any more than she already was. He found the safest place to rest, a niche in one of the trees. He set up his standard seals, including the genjutsu seal he had reverse-engineered, and then lay down and closed his eyes. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. The moment Naruto entered the seal, looking like his normal blonde self as the seal could only show himself as he truly was, it was to the sight of an angry Akane pacing around angrily. He had never actually seen her angry. To be honest, with the way she acted he hadn't even really known she could get angry. However, from the way she was pacing, and the number of swear words coming from her lips, he knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that she wasn't just angry. She was downright pissed off. The only question he had was about what? Akane-kan, he asked tentatively, stopping her mid-pace and getting her to turn and look at him. She swung to him fully and began stalking over to him, that angry look still on her face. Thinking she was angry, Naruto began to back up, not that it deterred her, and he was forced to stop soon anyways as he was backed up against a tree. He gulped as he watched her finish closing the distance between them, and could swear he just saw his life flash before his eyes. Before thoughts of his death could take hold, however, Akane grabbed him by the face and claimed his lips with her own in a hungry and fierce kiss. For the second time that day Naruto froze. He could feel the soft, smooth texture of Akane's lips pressed against his own, her tongue pushing into his mouth as he let out an involuntary groan, the way she explored his mouth, taking in every detail, exploring every inch. He could feel her body as she pressed herself against him, the way her assets, which were not too big or too small, a size that was as close as could be considered perfect, were pressing into his chest. A shiver escaped him as he felt one of her legs come up and begin to rub against his own, sensually gliding up and down and causing goosebumps to rise on his skin. When Akane finally let him go from the kiss, Naruto found himself slumping against the tree. Akane smirked as she saw him slide onto his butt, a glazed-over look in his eyes. She knelt down next to him and waited for him to come to. When he did, she said, "I want you to listen very carefully, Naruto-kun. You are mine." She watched as Naruto's eyes widened in shock and he opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "No one else will ever kiss you like that besides me, those lips are mine." He suddenly let out a soft squeak as one of Akane's hands grabbed a hold of Naruto's crotch. "And this is mine too. No one will ever touch this aside from me, and if they do, both you and her will suffer unspeakable tortures, understood?" Were Naruto actually in the right state of mind, he might have questioned Akane on why she was being so dominating. As it was, all he could do was nod. "Good," Akane said, and just like that her demeanor changed, no longer an aura of seductive malevolence that hung around her like a shroud. She gave him a soft smile. As she straddled his legs and cupped his cheek with one hand. Leaning down, she gave him a much gentler kiss than the searing one from before. "You know," Akane whispered against his lips, her warm breath causing him to shudder, "it's considered bad taste not to kiss a girl when she starts kissing you." She went back to kissing him and Naruto began to respond, tentatively at first, as if he was afraid of doing something wrong. However, the moment he actually began to kiss back, Akane responded more enthusiastically, grabbing his arms and bringing them around her waist, before her own went into his hair. Spurred on by the way she pressed herself against him and the enthusiastic and downright sexy noises Akane was making, Naruto began to kiss her back harder. As they continued, Akane was pleased to note that Naruto actually got better as they continued. It seemed his learning curve didn't just apply to combat situations. When they finally broke apart, Naruto opened the eyes he had closed and saw Akane resting her forehead against his, with her nose just barely touching his own. "What does this mean?" he asked, and Akane could see the confusion in them. "I love you," she said simply, causing his eyes to widen. She smiled at finally being allowed to let her feelings known. "I've loved you for a while now, but I didn't want to push you into anything because you were so young. I was going to talk to you after you graduated and see if we could work." What changed? The moment he asked that, he saw her face darken and realized it might not be the best subject. "Never mind," he said quickly, changing directions to something else. "So what does that make us?" "I suppose that would depend," she said, reining in her thoughts on killing Mei to answer him. "On?" Naruto prodded her. "On how you feel about me," she admitted, thinking much more clearly now that her anger at Mei was starting to dissipate some. She didn't really want to push him into a relationship with her. She wanted him, badly, and she wouldn't deny that. But she loved him, and when you loved someone as much as she loved Naruto, all you wanted was to see the person you loved happy. Now that her demonic instincts to claim her mate had gone down, she was no longer thinking along the lines she had when threatening him. In fact, she was pretty embarrassed to have let her baser instincts get the better of her. Naruto didn't even really have to think about his feelings for Akane. Ever since he had met her, the red-haired woman had been nothing but helpful. She had taught him everything he knew, had held him when he was sad, gave him advice, encouragement, and hadn't kept any secrets from him. On top of that, he would admit that he found her extremely beautiful, with beauty being only a relative term, since he honestly couldn't find any word in human vocabulary that could describe her beauty. People like Mei were pretty, but someone like Akane simply defied description. I love you too, he said, making Akane nearly cry in relief. Honestly, I loved you ever since I first met you, ever since you first offered to help me. You became the most important person in the world to me. And after, well. That incident? Asked Akane, giving an unrepentant grin at Naruto's blush. Yes, he tried to glare at her, but with how red his face was, it wasn't all that effective. He sighed, after that incident I couldn't stop thinking about you, about how you looked, how it would feel to have, well, this, he gestured to their current position, happen. I kept comparing you to other women, all of whom fell several leagues short of the mark. Honestly, I thought about saying something, but I was afraid you'd think I was joking, and tell me that I was just a kid or something. Well, you don't need to worry about that, Akane told him as she kissed him on one cheek, then the other, and then came back to his lips. They enjoyed a few moments of this before she broke the kiss and smiled at him. I love you too, and nothing will change that. Naruto smiled before he placed a hand behind Akane's head and pulled her mouth back to his, giving the vixen a pleasant surprise. Naruto decided to spend the rest of the night in the seal, enjoying the feeling of making out with his new, well, whatever she was. He would decide that later, he figured. For now, all that mattered was using the knowledge Akane had given him so many years ago by applying it to this moment. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Standing on top of the Mizukage Tower overlooking the village was a man wearing a black cloak with a high collar. He had short-cropped spiky black hair with a blue tint to it and was wearing an orange swirl mask with only a single eye hole. As he looked out over the village of Kirigakure, a voice spoke up behind him, "It seems your puppet was defeated." "It doesn't matter," the man said, "he was no longer of any use anyways. Do not lie to me. You think I can't see through you, boy? I can tell you're surprised, angry, you didn't think he would lose so quickly. And now, you're one pawn short. I still have more pawns I can move," he insisted. Yagura was but one piece, and he outlived his usefulness anyways. "Then you know what you are going to do?" "Of course, I have already found a group in AIM who I can use for my purposes." "You mean my purposes?" "Your purposes are my purposes," the man tried to placate the voice. "You are a slipper one, child. Do not forget that it was I who gave you your life back, and I can take it just as easily as I returned it to you. If you attempt to betray me, I will erase your existence from this world and find a more malleable tool. I know my purpose." "Good, I am pleased to hear that. See to it that you do not fail me." The man in the orange mask looked out at the village for a few more moments before he disappeared in a swirl of black chakra. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Omake, the Sanbai emerges, dwarfing over the two of them, standing even larger than the Mizukage mansion. The Sanbai no Kayade game stood in front of the two ninja. The Sanbai primarily resembled a large turtle, but with a crab-like shell, and three shrimp-like tails. It had a pair of human-like arms and hands, but no hind legs. Its right eye was constantly closed, indicating some sort of possible injury. At least, Erasure hoped it had some kind of injury, because he couldn't see any other weak point on the hardened carapace. Mei's eyes widened. "Oh my god. I've never felt so much power before. It's got a power level that's over 9,000. Mei turned to look at Erasure, who rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Sorry, I've always wanted to say that. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like, share and subscribe. This is Raven Sage signing off.